The morning mist clings to the ancient stones like the breath of sleeping gods. At 8,000 feet above sea level, where the air grows thin and the world below disappears into cotton-white clouds, stands one of humanity's most enigmatic achievements, Machu Picchu, the lost city of the Incas, a testament to human ambition carved into the very spine of the Andes Mountains. But what if everything we believe about this sacred citadel is wrong? Picture the scene as dawn breaks over the Huayna Picchu Peak. Golden light spills across terraced gardens that cascade down impossible slopes. Stone walls, fitted with such precision that not even a knife blade can slip between their joints, emerge from the retreating shadows like the ribs of some colossal, sleeping creature. The silence is profound here, broken only by the whisper of wind through ancient doorways and the distant cry of Andean condors riding the thermals far below. This is a place that exists between worlds, between earth and sky, between the known and the unknowable, between the accepted history we teach in classrooms and the deeper, stranger truth that may lie buried beneath centuries of assumption and academic orthodoxy. For more than a century, we have told ourselves a comfortable story about Machu Picchu. We say it was built by the Inca, that remarkable civilization that once stretched across much of South America like a golden thread connecting mountain peak to mountain peak. We point to the reign of Pachacati, the great Inca ruler who expanded his empire beyond imagination in the 15th century. We nod approvingly at the ingenuity of a people who could move massive stones across treacherous mountain terrain without the wheel, without iron tools, without draft animals stronger than the humble llama. But stand among these ruins in the pre-dawn darkness, when the tourist buses have not yet begun their winding ascent from the valley floor, and feel the weight of something far older pressing against your consciousness. Touch the stones that have weathered 5 centuries of wind and rain and earthquake, yet remain as perfectly fitted as the day they were placed. Listen to the mountain itself, to the whispered secrets it keeps locked in granite and time. What if the Inca did not build this place at all? What if they merely inherited it, claimed it, perhaps even worshipped at altars raised by hands that had turned to dust long before Pachacati drew his first breath? What if Machu Picchu is not a testament to Incan genius, but rather the last surviving monument to a civilization so ancient, so thoroughly erased from memory that we have no name for its people, no record of their passing, no trace of their existence save for these stones arranged with impossible precision on this impossibly remote mountaintop? The very location speaks to this deeper mystery. Why here, of all places? Why build a city where the air is so thin that every breath is an effort, where water must be channeled through? Ingenious aqueducts where every stone must be carried up paths so steep they challenge the limits of human endurance? The official explanations feel suddenly hollow when confronted with the sheer audacity of the enterprise. A royal estate, they say, a mountain retreat for Inca nobility, a fortress guarding the approaches to the sacred valley. Perhaps, or perhaps something far more profound drew the builders to this particular ridge, this specific alignment of stone and sky and sacred mountain peak. Perhaps they understood something about this place that we have forgotten, some quality of the location that made it worth the superhuman effort required to raise a city among the clouds. The stones themselves seemed to pulse with this hidden knowledge. Andesite and granite, quarried from sources scattered across the mountainous landscape, shaped and fitted with a precision that modern engineers struggle to explain, let alone replicate. No mortar binds these walls, yet they have stood firm through 5 centuries of seismic activity that regularly shakes the Andes like a dog shaking water from its fur. The builders understood something about working with stone that we have lost, some technique or technology that allowed them to achieve results that seemed to mock the limitations of primitive tools and human muscle power. As the sun climbs higher and the mist retreats to reveal the full majesty of the citadel, questions multiply like shadows lengthening across ancient courtyards. Who really walked these paths? Who carved these altar stones? and aligned these windows to capture the light of the winter solstice. The Inca were master builders. This cannot be disputed. Their roads stretched across an empire that spanned desert and mountain and jungle. Their administrative skills held together a realm that would have challenged Rome at its height. But Machu Picchu feels different, older, as if the Inca found it here and recognized something so sacred, so perfectly aligned with their own spiritual understanding, that they could do nothing but preserve it, protect it, perhaps elaborate upon it, but never truly claim it as their own creation. This is the question that haunts the morning mist and echoes in the silence between the stones. If Machu Picchu is not what we think it is, if it predates the Inca by centuries or even millennia, then human history itself becomes a far more mysterious proposition. We would be forced to acknowledge that civilizations rise and fall and leave behind mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about the past. We would have to admit that the story we tell about human progress, about the steady march from primitive to sophisticated, might be nothing more than a comforting fiction designed to make sense of ruins that refuse to fit our neat chronological categories. But that is precisely what makes Machu Picchu so compelling, so endlessly fascinating. It refuses to be categorized. It resists easy explanation. The year 1911 shimmers in the historical record like heat rising from sun-baked stone. On a humid July morning, a young American academic named Hiram Bingham III climbed a precarious path up the eastern slopes of Huayna Picchu Mountain, following rumors and fragments of local knowledge that spoke of ruins hidden among the cloud forests. What he found there would reshape our understanding of pre-Columbian civilization and launch 1,000 archaeological expeditions into the heart of the Andes. Bingham was not the first outsider to reach Machu Picchu. Local Quechua families had been living among the ruins for decades, tending small farms on the ancient terraces, using the Inca walls as foundations for their modest homes. But Bingham was the first to recognize the significance of what lay before him, the first to document the site with photographs and measurements, the first to bring news of the discovery to the attention of the wider world. His cameras captured images that would become iconic. Stone walls rising like prayers into the mountain sky. Terraces that stepped down the mountainside in perfect geometric progression. Buildings so precisely fitted that centuries of weathering had failed to disturb their fundamental integrity. Within months, National Geographic had funded a full expedition. Within years, Machu Picchu had entered the global consciousness as one of the world's great archaeological wonders. The story that emerged from these early investigations became the foundation of everything we thought we knew about the site. According to the archaeologists and historians who followed in Bingham's footsteps, Machu Picchu represented the pinnacle of Inca architectural achievement. Built sometime in the mid-15th century, during the reign of Pachacati Inca, Yupanqui, the ninth ruler of the Inca dynasty, it served as a royal estate, a sacred center, and a demonstration of imperial power projected into the most remote corners of the realm. Pachacati, whose name means earthshaker or cataclysm, was indeed a transformative figure in Andean history. Under his leadership, the Inca expanded from a small kingdom centered on the city of Cusco into an empire that would eventually stretch from present-day Ecuador to central Chile. He was a military genius, a political innovator, and according to the chroniclers who recorded Inca oral traditions in the decades following the Spanish conquest, a patron of architecture and engineering on a scale that rivaled the pharaohs of Egypt. The official narrative placed Machu Picchu firmly within this context of Inca imperial expansion. The site was seen as evidence of the remarkable engineering capabilities that allowed the Inca to project their power across the most challenging terrain on Earth. The precision stonework was attributed to centuries of accumulated knowledge passed down through generations of Inca craftsmen. The sophisticated water management systems were explained as natural developments of techniques first perfected in the Cusco Valley, and then adapted to the unique challenges of building at extreme altitude on an exposed mountain ridge. This interpretation gained credibility from the broader archaeological record of Inca achievement. Throughout their former territories, researchers found evidence of the same distinctive architectural style, the same precisely fitted stone blocks, the same trapezoidal doorways and windows, the same sophisticated understanding of how to build structures that could withstand the frequent earthquakes that racked the Andes. Machu Picchu, while remarkable in its setting and state of preservation, was seen as part of a continuum of Inca construction techniques that could be traced across the empire. The dating seemed to confirm this interpretation. Radiocarbon analysis of organic materials found in the ruins suggested construction beginning around 1450 CE, placing it squarely within Pachacuti's reign. Spanish colonial documents made no mention of the site, suggesting it had been abandoned before the conquistadors arrived, probably sometime in the early 16th century as the Inca Empire collapsed under the combined pressure of civil war and European disease. This timeline created a neat narrative arc. Machu Picchu was born at the height of Inca power, flourished for perhaps a century as a royal retreat and sacred center, then was quietly abandoned as the empire that created it crumbled under the weight of invasion and internal strife. The jungle reclaimed the terraces, vines grew over the stone walls, and the site slipped from historical memory until Bingham's as dramatic rediscovery brought it back into the light of scholarly attention. The engineering achievements documented at the site seemed to support this interpretation. The builders had somehow transported massive blocks of granite and andesite across miles of treacherous mountain terrain. They had carved and fitted these blocks with a precision that modern stonemasons struggle to replicate. They had designed and constructed a water management system that channeled mountain springs through a series of fountains and drainage channels that still function perfectly after more than 5 centuries. They had created agricultural terraces that maximized growing space while preventing erosion on slopes so steep that a misstep could mean a fatal fall. All of this was attributed to Inca ingenuity and the mobilization of massive labor forces through the MITA system, a form of tribute labor that allowed the empire to marshal the workforce needed for monumental construction projects. The lack of written records was explained by the Inca use of quipu, a system of knotted strings that recorded numerical and perhaps linguistic information in ways that modern scholars have only begun to decipher. For decades, this official story satisfied most questions about Machu Picchu's origins and purpose. It fit comfortably within established understandings of Inca capabilities and chronology. It provided rational explanations for the site's most impressive features. It reinforced the narrative of Inca civilization as the culminating achievement of pre-Columbian Andean culture. Yet even as this orthodox interpretation took hold in academic circles and popular consciousness, anomalies began to accumulate. Details that didn't quite fit the accepted timeline. Construction techniques that seemed to exceed even the remarkable Inca standard. Alignments and proportions that suggested knowledge and purposes beyond those typically attributed to royal estates or religious centers. Meanwhile, other voices began to question whether the Spanish colonial silence regarding Machu Picchu necessarily indicated recent abandonment. What if the site had been sacred and secret long before the conquistadors arrived? What if the Inca themselves had inherited it from earlier builders and maintained it as a legacy too important to risk exposing to foreign eyes? What if the neat chronology that placed construction in the mid-15th century represented not the birth of Machu Picchu, but merely its most recent renovation and expansion? These questions remained largely academic curiosities, footnotes to the main narrative of Inca achievement. But they planted seeds of doubt that would eventually grow into more fundamental challenges to everything we thought we knew about this mysterious city in the clouds. Touch the wall of the Temple of the Three Windows and feel the impossible. Your fingertips trace joints so precise, they seem to mock the limitations of primitive tools and human patience. No mortar binds these massive blocks of andesite, yet they fit together with a perfection that would challenge modern laser cutting technology. These are not simply well-built walls. They are artifacts of a construction philosophy that seems to transcend everything we understand about pre-industrial capabilities. The stones themselves tell stories that the official chronology struggles to accommodate. Each block has been individually shaped to mate perfectly with its neighbors, creating three-dimensional puzzles of staggering complexity. Some blocks display as many as 12 precisely angled faces, each surface ground and polished to create joints measured in fractions of millimeters. The largest stones at Machu Picchu weigh more than 50 tons, yet they have been lifted, positioned, and fitted with an accuracy that suggests not just remarkable skill, but access to techniques and technologies that have been lost to time. Walk through the ruins in the early morning, when shadows reveal the subtle curves and angles that define Inca architecture, and observe something even more puzzling. The stonework is not uniform throughout the site. Different areas display distinctly different construction techniques, as if multiple generations or even multiple cultures had contributed to the citadel's construction. The finest masonry, found in the most sacred areas, achieves levels of precision that seem to belong to a different technological paradigm entirely. Consider the famous Intihuatana stone, carved from a single piece of bedrock with surfaces oriented to capture and focus the light of the sun at specific times of year. The precision required to achieve these solar alignments speaks to an understanding of astronomy and mathematics that challenges assumptions about the sophistication of pre-Columbian knowledge systems. But more than that, the stone itself displays tool marks and finishing techniques that appear to differ subtly but significantly from the methods evident in other areas of the site. These variations in construction quality and technique create a puzzle within a puzzle. If Machu Picchu was built during a single period of intensive construction in the mid-15th century, why do different areas of the site display such dramatically different levels of sophistication? The most logical explanation suggests phases of construction spread across much longer periods than the official chronology allows. But this raises uncomfortable questions about who was building what and when. The master masons responsible for the finest stonework at Machu Picchu possess skills that seem almost supernatural when compared to the tools available to them. Working with implements of bronze, stone, and hardwood, they somehow achieved results that approached the precision of modern machine work. They understood principles of engineering and geology that allowed them to create structures capable of withstanding centuries of seismic activity in one of the world's most earthquake-prone regions. They developed techniques for working the exceptionally hard andesite and granite that comprise the site as most impressive features. Yet here lies perhaps the deepest mystery of all. If the Inca possessed such extraordinary masonry skills, why are they not evident throughout their empire? Other Inca sites display impressive stonework, certainly, but nothing that approaches the precision and sophistication found in the most sacred areas of Machu Picchu. The famous walls of Sacsayhuaman near Cusco are massive and impressive, but they lack the surgical precision of Machu Picchu's finest masonry. The same pattern repeats throughout former Inca territories. Good stonework, sometimes very good stonework, but nothing that matches the almost impossible perfection achieved on this remote mountaintop. This suggests two possibilities, both of which challenge the orthodox interpretation of Machu Picchu's origins. Either the Inca developed and then somehow lost construction techniques of extraordinary sophistication, or the finest stonework at the site predates the Inca period entirely, representing the achievements of earlier builders whose identity has been lost to history. The first possibility seems highly unlikely. Civilizations rarely lose core technologies over short periods, unless catastrophic disruption destroys the knowledge base entirely. The Inca Empire, despite its ultimate collapse, maintained continuous cultural and technological traditions that can be traced through the Spanish colonial period and into modern times. If they had possessed the techniques necessary to create Machu Picchu's finest stonework, those techniques should appear in other sites, should be referenced in oral traditions, should leave some trace in the historical record. The second possibility opens far more intriguing questions. What if the Inca inherited Machu Picchu from predecessors whose construction capabilities exceeded their own? What if the site represents a palimpsest of construction, with later Inca additions built upon and around the work of much earlier master builders? What if the varying quality of stonework throughout the site reflects not different phases of Inca construction, but the interaction between inherited structures of extraordinary sophistication and later additions built using more conventional techniques? This interpretation finds support in the geological evidence preserved in the stones themselves. The hardest andesite blocks, those displaying the most precise fitting and finishing, show weathering patterns that suggest exposure to the elements for much longer periods than the 5 to 6 centuries allowed by conventional chronology. The surface patina, the accumulation of lichens, the subtle erosion patterns, all speak to ages measured in millennia rather than centuries. Meanwhile, other blocks in the same walls show clearly different weathering characteristics, as if they had been quarried and placed much more recently. The contrast is subtle but unmistakable to trained eyes. It suggests a site with a much longer and more complex construction history than the neat narrative of 15th century Inca achievement allows. The implications ripple outward like stones dropped into still water. If Machu Picchu's finest stonework predates the Inca by centuries or millennia, then human capabilities in the ancient Americas were far more advanced than we have allowed ourselves to imagine. We would be forced to acknowledge the existence of sophisticated civilizations that rose and fell and left behind monuments that challenge everything we think we know about the trajectory of human technological development. But the stones care nothing for our theories or our chronologies. They simply exist, fitted together with impossible precision, whispering secrets in a language we have forgotten how to speak. In the high villages of the Andes, where Quechua voices carry stories older than written memory, the elders speak of times before the Inca. They tell of the Viracocha people, the foam-born ones, who walked among the mountains when the world was still soft and malleable. These were not mere humans, according to the ancient accounts, but beings of extraordinary knowledge and power who could shape stone with their hands and command the very mountains to yield their secrets. Listen carefully to these oral traditions, passed down through generations of Andean storytellers, and patterns emerge that challenge the neat boundaries of official history. The legends speak consistently of a time when godlike figures walked the earth, teaching the ancestors the arts of civilization. They brought knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and architecture. They showed the people how to work stone and metal, how to channel water, and read the movements of the stars. Then, when their work was complete, they departed, leaving behind monuments that would endure until the end of time. The chroniclers of the Spanish colonial period, men like Pedro Ciza de Leon and Bernab Cobo, recorded these traditions with the dutiful precision of European scholars attempting to understand the peoples they had conquered. But filtered through the lens of Christian orthodoxy, these accounts became curiosities, folktales, evidence of the primitive superstitions that the light of European civilization would naturally dispel. The deeper truths embedded in the oral traditions were dismissed as mythological confusion, the inevitable distortion that occurs when pre-literate peoples attempt to preserve historical memory across generations. Yet what if these traditions preserve actual memories of earlier civilizations, encoded in mythological language that protected them from the erosion of time? What if the Viracocha were not gods or supernatural beings, but representatives of sophisticated cultures whose achievements were so far beyond those of their successors that they could only be remembered as divine intervention? The name Viracocha itself carries clues to this interpretation. Often translated as foam of the sea or fat of the lake, it suggests beings who emerge from the waters, perhaps from across the ocean or from the depths of Lake Titicaca, a high-altitude inland sea that sits like a blue jewel in the crown of the Altiplano. In Inca cosmology, Viracocha was the creator deity, the source of all life and knowledge. But the oral traditions describe multiple Viracocha, a people rather than a single divine figure. These beings were said to possess extraordinary physical characteristics. They were tall, fair-skinned, bearded, with features that differed markedly from those of the native Andean populations. They wore flowing robes and carried staffs of power. They could travel vast distances with supernatural speed, appearing simultaneously in locations separated by hundreds of miles of mountain terrain. Most significantly for our purposes, they were master builders who could work stone as if it were clay, creating monuments that would stand as testament to their knowledge long after they themselves had vanished into legend. The geographical distribution of Viracocha traditions correlates remarkably with the locations of the most sophisticated pre-Inca architecture in the Andes. Tiwanaku, the mysterious ceremonial center on the shores of Lake Titicaca, preserves oral traditions of Viracocha builders who emerged from the lake itself. Sacsayhuaman, with its massive zigzag walls, is said in local legend to have been built by giants who could move stones through the power of song. Ollantaytambo, with its precisely fitted megalithic blocks, carries stories of supernatural architects who worked by night and vanished with the dawn. And Machu Picchu, perched on its mountain ridge between earth and sky, fits perfectly into this pattern of Viracocha-associated sites. The oral traditions of the Sacred Valley speak of the mountaintop citadel as a place where the ancient ones communed with the stars, where knowledge was preserved in stone against the coming darkness of forgetting. According to these accounts, the Inca found Machu Picchu already ancient when they first expanded into the region, recognized its sacred significance, and maintained it as a legacy site too important to abandon or substantially alter. These traditions find unexpected support in the astronomical alignments built into Machu Picchu's architecture. The Intihuatana stone functions as a precise solar observatory, tracking the movement of the sun through seasonal cycles with accuracy that requires sophisticated mathematical knowledge. The Temple of the Three Windows frames specific star constellations at particular times of year. The overall layout of the site appears to mirror celestial patterns in ways that suggest the builders possessed detailed understanding of astronomical cycles extending far beyond simple seasonal observation. Such knowledge takes generations to accumulate through careful observation and recording. It requires institutional continuity across centuries, the kind of long-term cultural stability that allows complex knowledge systems to develop and mature. The Inca, for all their achievements, ruled their empire for less than a century before Spanish conquest disrupted their knowledge traditions. The astronomical sophistication built into Machu Picchu suggests much longer periods of continuous observation and refinement. The oral traditions also preserve memories of catastrophic events that destroyed the Viracocha civilization. Stories speak of great floods, of the sun disappearing from the sky, of the earth shaking until mountains fell and lakes drained away. These accounts describe a time of darkness and chaos when the old knowledge was nearly lost, when survivors scattered to remote refuges in the highest mountains. Only slowly, over many generations, did civilization begin to recover, building upon the fragments of ancient wisdom that had been preserved in isolated sanctuaries. Could Machu Picchu have been one of these refuges, a repository of ancient knowledge built to survive the collapse of a sophisticated civilization? The site's remote location, its defensive positioning, its sophisticated water management systems all suggest a place designed for long-term survival during difficult times. The precision of its astronomical alignments speaks to the preservation of complex knowledge systems that might otherwise have been lost. If this interpretation has merit, then Machu Picchu becomes something far more significant than a royal Inca estate. It becomes a bridge between civilizations, a stone library where the achievements of forgotten builders were preserved until new cultures arose capable of appreciating and maintaining their legacy. The Inca, in this reading, were not the creators of Machu Picchu, but rather its inheritors and guardians, protecting knowledge they recognized as precious, even if they could no longer fully comprehend its origins. The whispers of older legends carry these possibilities on the mountain wind, challenging us to look beyond the comfortable boundaries of established chronology. The mathematics embedded in Machu Picchu's stones speak a language older than Quechua, more precise than any oral tradition. Stand in the central plaza as the sun reaches its zenith on the winter solstice and witness geometry transformed into prophecy. The shadows fall exactly where the architects intended. The light penetrates precisely the windows designed to frame it. The entire citadel becomes a vast astronomical instrument calibrated to measure time itself with crystalline accuracy. This is not the work of builders who simply understood practical construction. This is evidence of mathematical sophistication that approaches the theoretical, of geometric principles applied with a precision that suggests access to knowledge systems far more advanced than anything attributed to pre-Columbian civilizations. The blueprint encoded in these stones reveals understanding of astronomical cycles, mathematical constants, and geometric relationships that would not seem out of place in a Renaissance architect's workshop or a modern observatory. Consider first the overall layout of the site, viewed from above like a condor riding the thermals high over the Huayna Picchu Peak. The buildings and plazas, the terraces and pathways, the walls and water channels all conform to a master plan that displays remarkable mathematical coherence. The proportions follow golden ratio relationships. The angles conform to astronomical necessities. The entire complex can be understood as a vast mandala, a geometric meditation on the relationship between earthly architecture and cosmic order. The precision extends to the smallest details. Individual stones display cutting angles that conform to mathematical principles, requiring sophisticated understanding of three-dimensional geometry. The famous 12-angled stone of Cusco may be celebrated for its complexity, but Machu Picchu contains hundreds of blocks with equally challenging geometries, each fitted to its neighbors with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. This suggests not just individual craftsmanship of extraordinary skill, but systematic application of mathematical principles across the entire construction project. The astronomical alignments reveal even more sophisticated knowledge. The Intihuatana stone functions as a precision gnomon, its shadows tracking solar movements with accuracy sufficient for complex calendar calculations. But beyond simple seasonal observation, the stone appears calibrated to measure much longer astronomical cycles. Its angles correspond to the precession of the equinoxes, that slow wobble of Earth's axis that creates a 26,000-year cycle in the apparent position of stars. Knowledge of precession requires centuries of careful observation and mathematical analysis to detect and measure. This suggests builders who thought in terms of geological time, who planned for millennia rather than decades. The Inca, remarkable though their achievements were, ruled an empire measured in human generations. The astronomical sophistication built into Machu Picchu implies institutional continuity across much longer periods, the kind of cultural stability that allows complex knowledge systems to develop through centuries of accumulated observation and refinement. The water management systems reveal similar mathematical sophistication applied to hydraulic engineering. The fountains and channels that carry mountain spring water through the citadel display understanding of fluid dynamics principles that were not formally codified in European science until the Renaissance. The flow rates, the channel geometries, the fountain designs all conform to mathematical relationships that optimize water pressure and distribution throughout the site. More intriguingly, the water channels appear designed to create specific acoustic effects. Water flowing through the stone conduits generates precise musical tones. Different fountains producing different notes in what amounts to a hydraulic organ played by the mountain springs themselves. This suggests builders who understood not just the practical necessity of water management, but also the aesthetic and possibly ritual applications of precisely controlled sound frequencies. The terraces that cascade down the mountain slopes display equally sophisticated mathematical planning. Their proportions, their orientation, their relationship to each other, and to the overall site layout all conform to geometric principles that maximize both agricultural efficiency and aesthetic harmony. But beyond practical considerations, the terrace systems appear designed to create specific visual effects when viewed from key observation points within the citadel. They function as a kind of three-dimensional geometric art, transforming the entire mountainside into an extension of the architectural complex. These mathematical principles extend even to the quarrying and transportation of the massive stones used in construction. The blocks display evidence of cutting techniques that achieve geometric precision across surfaces measured in square meters. The tool marks, where they remain visible, suggest cutting methods that could maintain straight lines and precise angles across enormous stone faces. This requires not just skilled craftsmanship, but systematic application of geometric principles to solve practical construction challenges. The transportation of these blocks from quarries scattered across the surrounding mountains represents another mathematical achievement. The builders somehow calculated load-bearing capacities, planned route geometries, and coordinated logistics for moving multi-ton stones across terrain that would challenge modern heavy equipment. The precision with which blocks from different quarries fit together in the finished walls suggests mathematical planning that accounted for every variable in the complex process of monument construction. Perhaps most remarkably, the entire site appears designed according to a modular system based on specific mathematical constants. Building dimensions, plaza proportions, terrace relationships all conform to recurring numerical ratios that suggest a unified mathematical philosophy underlying the entire construction project. This level of systematic mathematical application implies theoretical knowledge that goes far beyond practical building experience. The blueprint preserved in Machu Picchu's stones thus reveals builders who possessed mathematical and astronomical knowledge approaching the sophistication of much later civilizations. They understood geometric principles, astronomical cycles, and engineering applications that required generations of accumulated learning to develop and refine. They thought in terms of precision, measured to minute fractions, of time cycles spanning millennia, of construction projects designed to endure until the stars themselves shifted in their courses. Such knowledge does not develop overnight. It requires institutional continuity, systematic observation, and theoretical sophistication that seems almost impossible to reconcile with the conventional chronology that places Machu Picchu's construction in the brief flowering of 15th century Inca expansion. The mathematical sophistication encoded in these stones whispers of much longer histories, of knowledge systems that developed over centuries and were applied by builders whose understanding of the cosmos far exceeded anything we have attributed to pre-Columbian civilizations. The forgotten blueprint embedded in Machu Picchu's geometry thus becomes a key that might unlock much larger mysteries about the sophistication and antiquity of Andean civilization. Deep in the valleys that cradle Machu Picchu like cupped hands, the mountain reveals its secrets reluctantly. Scattered across miles of treacherous terrain lie the quarry sites where the citadel's massive stones were born from living rock. These are not the neat, organized extraction sites one might expect from a systematic construction project. Instead, they appear as raw wounds in the mountainside, places where enormous blocks were somehow separated from bedrock formations with a precision that defies explanation. The largest identified quarry lies more than 3 miles from the citadel itself, accessible only by paths so steep and narrow that even llamas struggle to maintain footing. Here, Andesite blocks weighing 50 tons or more were somehow extracted from the mountain and transported across terrain that would challenge modern heavy machinery. No evidence remains of the ramps, roads, or mechanical systems that conventional archaeology insists must have been necessary for such an undertaking. The stones simply appear to have been moved by methods that have left no archaeological trace. This absence of evidence becomes more puzzling when considered alongside the scale of the undertaking. Conservative estimates suggest that Machu Picchu contains more than 150 major buildings constructed from fitted stone blocks. The total weight of worked stone in the citadel approaches 50,000 tons. All of this material was quarried from remote mountain sites, transported across difficult terrain, shaped to precise specifications, and fitted with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. Yet the archaeological record preserves no clear evidence of how any of this was accomplished. The official explanation invokes the a system of tribute labor that allowed Inca rulers to mobilize massive workforces for state construction projects. Thousands of workers, the theory suggests, moved the stones through coordinated human effort, using rope and wooden rollers to overcome the challenges of mountain terrain. Skilled masons shaped the blocks using bronze and stone tools, achieving precision through patience and accumulated expertise rather than advanced technology. This explanation satisfies the requirements of archaeological orthodoxy, but it struggles to account for the physical evidence preserved at the quarry sites themselves. The extraction marks visible on the quarry faces suggest cutting methods that achieved straight lines and precise angles across enormous stone surfaces. The blocks were separated from bedrock with clean breaks that show no evidence of the wedging and splitting techniques typically associated with ancient quarrying methods. More puzzling still, many of the extracted blocks show evidence of shaping and finishing work performed at the quarry sites themselves before transportation to the construction site. This represents an enormous waste of human labor if conventional transportation methods were employed. It would be far more efficient to rough-cut blocks at the quarry and perform detailed finishing work after transportation, minimizing the weight that had to be moved across difficult terrain. The fact that so much finishing work was performed at remote quarry sites suggests either extraordinary inefficiency in project planning or access to transportation methods so effortless that the weight of the blocks was not a significant consideration. The first possibility seems unlikely given the remarkable sophistication evident in every other aspect of Machu Picchu's construction. The second opens questions about technologies that have been lost to historical memory. Some of the quarry sites display even more puzzling characteristics. Blocks appear to have been extracted from formations where conventional cutting would be extremely difficult or impossible. In several locations, massive stones were somehow removed from the centers of solid rock formations, leaving cavities that suggest the blocks were somehow lifted straight up out of the surrounding stone matrix. No evidence remains of the access ramps or working platforms that would have been necessary to accomplish such extractions using conventional methods. The tool marks preserved on quarry faces and extracted blocks present another puzzle. Where they remain visible, these marks suggest cutting implements that could maintain sharp edges and precise geometries across enormous stone surfaces. Bronze tools, the hardest cutting implements available to pre-Columbian Andean cultures, would have dulled rapidly when used on the hard andesite and granite found at Machu Picchu. The tool marks suggest cutting edges that maintained their sharpness through extended use on the hardest available stone. Perhaps most intriguingly, several quarry sites show evidence of work that was apparently abandoned in mid-process. Partially extracted blocks remain attached to bedrock formations by narrow necks of stone, as if the quarry workers simply stopped work and never returned. These abandoned extractions preserve snapshots of quarrying techniques at various stages of completion, offering clues to methods that remain mysterious. The transportation routes between quarries and construction site present equally challenging puzzles. The most direct paths cross terrain so difficult that they would have been impassable to human workers moving massive stones by conventional means. Alternative routes that might have been more practical for large-scale stone transport show no evidence of the engineering works ramps, retaining walls, bridge foundations that would have been necessary to make them viable for heavy loads. The absence of transportation infrastructure becomes even more significant when compared to other Inca construction projects where archaeological evidence clearly documents the roads, ramps, and support systems used to move materials to construction sites. The infrastructure required for conventional heavy transport leaves distinctive archaeological signatures. At Machu Picchu, these signatures are absent, despite the enormous scale of the construction project. This suggests either that the transportation infrastructure was somehow completely erased by 5 centuries of weathering and vegetation growth, which seems unlikely given the preservation of much more delicate features at the site itself, or that the builders employed transportation methods that required no permanent infrastructure and left no archaeological trace. The quarry evidence thus points toward construction techniques that exceed the capabilities typically attributed to pre-Columbian Andean civilizations. The scale of the undertaking, the precision of the extraction methods, the absence of supporting infrastructure all suggest access to knowledge and capabilities that challenge conventional understanding of ancient American technological achievements. Hidden in the mountain valleys, the quarry sites preserve secrets that whisper of forgotten methods and lost technologies, of builders whose capabilities far exceeded anything we have allowed ourselves to imagine. What drives a civilization to build a city where the gods themselves might struggle to breathe? The question haunts every terrace and temple at Machu Picchu, echoing through stone corridors that seem to exist outside the normal flow of human purpose and practicality. The site's extreme location, its extraordinary construction costs, its apparent abandonment, all combine to create a mystery that resists conventional explanations for why ancient peoples chose to build where they built. The official narrative describes Machu Picchu as a royal estate, a mountain retreat where Inca nobility could escape the pressures of governing an empire that stretched from Ecuador to Chile. This explanation has the virtue of simplicity, fitting neatly into established patterns of elite behavior across cultures and centuries. Rulers have always sought exclusive refuges, places where they could commune with nature and the divine away from the demands of court life and administrative responsibility. Yet the royal estate theory struggles to account for the site's most distinctive features. The astronomical alignments built into the architecture speak to purposes far more complex than seasonal residence. The sophisticated water management systems seem excessive for a temporary retreat. The defensive positioning suggests concerns about security that go beyond protecting royal privacy. Most significantly, the sheer scale of the undertaking, the enormous investment of labor and resources required to build at such a remote and challenging location seems disproportionate to the relatively modest residential facilities that comprise the bulk of the site. Alternative interpretations have proliferated as researchers have attempted to solve the puzzle of Machu Picchu's purpose. Some scholars argue for a primarily religious function, suggesting the citadel served as a sacred center where priests and pilgrims gathered to perform ceremonies aligned with astronomical cycles. The numerous temples and ritual spaces support this interpretation, as do the astronomical alignments that suggest the site was designed to function as a vast observatory for tracking celestial movements. The religious center theory gains credibility from the site's dramatic setting. The Inca worshipped mountain spirits called Apu, and Machu Picchu's location places it in direct relationship with several of the most sacred peaks in the region. The citadel sits like a stone prayer offered to Huayna Picchu, the young peak that towers directly above the site, while commanding views of other sacred mountains that figured prominently in Inca spiritual geography. For a culture that saw the landscape itself as divine, few locations could have offered more powerful spiritual associations. But even the religious interpretation faces challenges when confronted with the site's practical features. The extensive agricultural terraces suggest long-term occupation by substantial populations. The storage facilities and workshops speak to economic activities that go beyond ceremonial functions. The defensive walls and strategic positioning indicate military considerations that seem unnecessary for a purely religious site. A third major theory proposes Machu Picchu as a fortress, a mountain stronghold designed to control access to the fertile valleys that stretch toward the Amazon basin. The site's commanding position offers spectacular views across the surrounding terrain, allowing defenders to observe approaching threats from great distances. The single narrow approach to the citadel could be easily defended by small forces against much larger attacking armies. The robust walls and defensive positioning suggest builders who are very concerned about military security. Yet the fortress theory also faces significant objections. The site lacks many features typically associated with military installations. There are no barracks for large garrisons, no armories for storing weapons, no massive defensive walls of the type found at clearly military Inca sites like Ollantaytambo. The emphasis on astronomical alignment and religious architecture seems inconsistent with purely military purposes. Most significantly, the location, while defensible, is also extremely vulnerable to siege warfare that could cut off supplies and water access. These competing theories share a common limitation. They all attempt to fit Machu Picchu into familiar categories of ancient construction, to explain the site in terms of purposes that make sense within established frameworks for understanding pre-Columbian civilizations. But what if Machu Picchu was built for purposes that exceed our current understanding of Inca capabilities and motivations? What if the site represents something entirely outside the normal categories of royal residences, religious centers, and military installations? Consider the possibility that Machu Picchu functioned as a repository of knowledge, a kind of ancient library or university where sophisticated information was preserved and transmitted across generations. This interpretation could explain many of the site's puzzling features. The astronomical alignments would serve as teaching tools for advanced knowledge of celestial mechanics. The agricultural terraces would function as experimental plots for developing and testing new farming techniques. The workshops would serve as laboratories for perfecting construction and manufacturing methods. Such an interpretation suggests builders who thought in terms of preserving and advancing civilization, rather than simply displaying wealth or power. It implies institutional purposes that transcend the typical concerns of royal courts and religious hierarchies. It points toward a level of cultural sophistication that prioritized knowledge preservation and transmission above immediate practical concerns. This knowledge repository theory finds support in the oral traditions that describe Machu Picchu as a place where ancient wisdom was preserved against times of darkness and forgetting. According to these accounts, the citadel served as a sanctuary where the most important knowledge of earlier civilizations was maintained by dedicated guardians who understood their responsibility to future generations. If this interpretation has merit, then Machu Picchu's apparent abandonment takes on entirely different significance. Rather than representing the collapse of Inca power, the abandonment might reflect a deliberate decision to protect precious knowledge from the disruption of Spanish conquest. The site's guardians might have sealed the citadel and scattered to preserve its secrets, allowing the jungle to reclaim the terraces, while the most important knowledge was carried to safety in other refuges. The puzzle of Machu Picchu's purpose thus becomes a mirror reflecting our own limitations in understanding the sophistication and motivations of pre-Columbian civilizations. Perhaps the site was built for purposes so advanced, so far beyond typical ancient concerns, that we lack the conceptual frameworks necessary to recognize its true function. In the deepest valleys of the Sacred Valley, where mist rises like ancestral breath from morning rivers, the stories persist. The old ones speak of a time when giants walked among the peaks, being so tall they could step from mountain to mountain without touching the valleys between. These were not the familiar figures of Inca legend, not the Viracocha, who brought knowledge from across the waters, but something older, something that belonged to the mountains themselves, like granite and snow and the cry of condors on the wind. The Spanish chroniclers recorded these accounts with the dutiful precision of European scholars, attempting to document the beliefs of conquered peoples. Pedro Ciza de Leon wrote of native testimonies describing giants of such great stature that from the knee down they were as large as the length of an ordinary fair-sized man. Garcilaso de la Vega, himself of mixed Inca and Spanish heritage, preserved oral traditions that spoke of giant bones discovered in caves throughout the Andes. Remains of beings whose physical proportions exceeded those of normal humans by extraordinary margins. These accounts were dismissed by colonial authorities as superstitious folklore, the inevitable mythological embellishments that accumulate around fragmentary memories of the distant past. But what if these traditions preserve actual historical information, encoded in metaphorical language that protected it from the erosion of time? What if the giants of Andean legend were not supernatural beings, but representatives of human populations, whose physical characteristics and technological capabilities so exceeded those of their successors that they could only be remembered as something beyond normal human scale? The possibility gains intriguing support from archaeological discoveries throughout the Americas. Sites like Poverty Point in Louisiana Serpent, Mound in Ohio, and Monte Alto in Guatemala preserve evidence of construction projects that seem to require organizational capabilities and technical knowledge far exceeding anything attributed to the cultures that supposedly built them. These sites display astronomical alignments, geometric sophistication, and engineering achievements that challenge conventional chronologies of human cultural development. In the Andes specifically, several sites preserve architectural features that seem designed for beings of extraordinary physical stature. Doorways that tower above normal human scale, ceiling heights that accommodate individuals far taller than typical Andean populations, stairways with steps so deep and high that they challenge normal human proportions. While these features might be explained as architectural choices designed to convey impressions of grandeur or divine scale, they could also represent practical accommodations for builders whose physical dimensions exceeded those of ordinary humans. The construction techniques evident at Machu Picchu and other megalithic Andean sites take on new significance when viewed through this lens. The massive stone blocks, some weighing 50 tons or more, could be more easily manipulated by beings of extraordinary physical strength and stature. Construction methods that seem impossible for normal humans become merely challenging for giants capable of lifting and positioning enormous weights through direct physical effort rather than complex mechanical systems. The oral traditions describe these giant builders as possessing not only extraordinary physical capabilities, but also advanced knowledge of construction techniques, astronomy, and mathematics. They were master architects who could visualize and execute construction projects of breathtaking complexity. They understood the properties of stone and metal in ways that allowed them to achieve results that seem almost supernatural when judged against the capabilities of their successors. According to the legends, the giants were not merely larger humans, but beings whose entire approach to civilization differed fundamentally from that of later peoples. They possessed knowledge systems that integrated practical engineering with sophisticated understanding of astronomical cycles and mathematical relationships. The traditions also describe the eventual fate of the giant builders. Some accounts speak of great catastrophes that destroyed their civilization. Floods, earthquakes that reduced their monuments to ruins and scattered the survivors to remote refuges in the highest mountains. Other versions suggest more gradual decline as the giants withdrew from the valleys and plains they had once dominated, retreating to isolated strongholds where they maintained their ancient knowledge, while the world below forgot their achievements. Could Machu Picchu represent one of these mountain refuges? A citadel built by, or for the giant architects described in Andean oral tradition. The site's extreme location, its defensive positioning, its sophisticated construction techniques all align with the characteristics attributed to giant strongholds in the ancient accounts. The astronomical alignments and mathematical sophistication built into the architecture correspond to the advanced knowledge systems that the traditions associate with the giant builders. This interpretation could explain many of the puzzling features that challenge conventional archaeological analysis. The precision stonework becomes the product of beings whose physical capabilities and technical knowledge far exceeded those of normal humans. The transportation of massive blocks across impossible terrain becomes feasible for giants capable of lifting and carrying weights that would require complex mechanical systems for ordinary people to manipulate. The apparent abandonment of Machu Picchu takes on new significance in this context. Rather than representing the collapse of Inca power, the site's evacuation might reflect the final withdrawal of the giant builders, their recognition that the time of their dominance had passed and that their knowledge must be preserved in other forms and other places, until future ages might be ready to rediscover and apply their achievements. The genetic evidence from ancient Andean remains adds another layer to this mystery. Skeletal analyses have revealed populations with physical characteristics that differ significantly from those of modern indigenous groups. Some remains display features suggesting much greater physical stature and robusticity than typical Andean populations. While these differences might reflect normal human variation within ancient populations, they could also preserve evidence of the giant builders described in oral tradition. The legends of Andean giants thus offer a framework for understanding Machu Picchu that transcends the limitations of conventional archaeological interpretation. They suggest builders whose capabilities exceeded normal human ranges, whose knowledge systems integrated advanced engineering with sophisticated astronomy and mathematics, whose purposes extended far beyond the typical concerns of royal courts and religious hierarchies. In the mist-shrouded valleys where ancient stones still whisper secrets to those who know how to listen, the stories of the giants continue to echo. Time itself becomes fluid at Machu Picchu, flowing around the ancient stones like mist around mountain peaks. Stand among the ruins at dawn, when shadows reveal architectural details hidden by the harsh light of midday, and feel the weight of centuries pressing against the boundaries of accepted chronology. What if the neat timeline that places this citadel's construction in the 15th century represents not historical fact, but the limitation of archaeological methods struggling to penetrate much deeper mysteries? The radiocarbon dating that supports conventional chronology tells only part of the story. Organic materials found in association with the ruins' wood, plant matter, textiles provide dates clustering around 1450 CE, seemingly confirming construction during the reign of Pachacati Inca. But radiocarbon dating measures the age of organic material, not the age of stone construction. It tells us when trees were cut and plants were harvested, not when massive andesite blocks were quarried and fitted with impossible precision. This distinction becomes crucial when considering the possibility of multiple construction phases spanning much longer periods. The organic materials dated to the 15th century could represent renovation, expansion, or simple occupation of structures that had been built centuries or millennia earlier. The Inca might have inherited Machu Picchu as a legacy site, maintaining and modifying ancient buildings while adding new structures in their distinctive architectural style. Evidence for such extended chronologies emerges from careful analysis of the site's varied construction techniques. Different areas of Machu Picchu display dramatically different levels of sophistication in stonework and engineering. The finest masonry found in the most sacred areas achieves precision that approaches the limits of what seems possible using pre-industrial methods. Other sections display competent but more conventional construction techniques typical of known Inca capabilities. This variation suggests not a single period of intensive construction, but rather multiple phases of building activity extending across much longer time spans. The most sophisticated work could date to much earlier periods, representing the achievements of builders whose identity has been lost to historical memory. Later additions and modifications could reflect successive cultures that recognized the site as important and maintained it according to their own architectural traditions and technical capabilities. The astronomical alignments built into Machu Picchu's architecture support this extended chronology. The precision of these alignments, particularly those that track long-term celestial cycles, like the precession of the equinoxes, requires centuries of continuous observation and refinement to achieve. Such astronomical sophistication cannot be developed during the brief flowering of a single civilization, but represents knowledge accumulated across many generations of systematic observation. The possibility that Machu Picchu predates the Inca by millennia rather than centuries finds provocative parallels in other parts of the world. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, arguably the world's oldest temple complex, was recently dated to nearly 12,000 years ago, pushing back the timeline for sophisticated construction and astronomical knowledge by thousands of years. The site displays architectural and astronomical sophistication that challenges everything archaeologists thought they knew about the capabilities of hunter-gatherer societies. Similar revisions of accepted chronologies have occurred at sites throughout the Americas. Poverty Point in Louisiana has been dated to 3,700 years ago, revealing complex earthwork construction and long-distance trade networks that predate anything previously known in North America by millennia. Monte Alto in Guatemala displays sculptural and astronomical achievements that appear to predate the Maya by thousands of years. These discoveries suggest that sophisticated civilizations were rising and falling across the Americas much earlier than conventional chronology allows. The pattern emerging from these discoveries points toward cycles of civilization that operate on much longer timescales than historians have traditionally recognized. Advanced cultures appear to have developed sophisticated knowledge systems, built monumental architecture, and then disappeared, leaving behind ruins that subsequent civilizations inherited, maintained, and sometimes expanded according to their own capabilities and purposes. Machu Picchu fits perfectly into this pattern of cyclical civilization. Its most sophisticated features, the precision stonework, the astronomical alignments, the mathematical sophistication of its overall design, could represent the achievements of builders working thousands of years before the Inca expansion into the region. The conventional radiocarbon dates would then mark not the original construction, but rather the period when the Inca discovered, occupied, and renovated ancient structures they recognized as sacred and scientifically valuable. This interpretation could explain many of the anomalies that challenge conventional archaeological analysis. The precision stonework becomes the product of civilizations with much longer development periods than the Monaicids, than a century or two typically allowed for Inca achievement. The astronomical sophistication reflects knowledge systems accumulated across millennia of continuous observation. The site's apparent abandonment represents not the collapse of Inca power, but rather the withdrawal of guardians protecting ancient knowledge from the disruption of Spanish conquest. The geological evidence preserved in the stones themselves supports this extended chronology. The weathering patterns on the most ancient blocks suggest exposure to the elements for periods measured in millennia rather than centuries. The surface patina, the accumulation of lichens, the subtle erosion characteristics all point toward much greater age than conventional dating allows. Meanwhile, other evidence from around the world suggests that human civilizations have been developing sophisticated knowledge systems and monumental architecture for much longer periods than previously recognized. The recent discovery of elaborate cave paintings in Spain, dating to more than 65,000 years ago, indicates that symbolic thinking and artistic expression developed much earlier in human history than previously believed. Sites like Gunung Padang in Indonesia display construction techniques and astronomical alignments that may date back 20,000 years or more. These discoveries collectively suggest that human capability for sophisticated architecture, astronomical observation, and mathematical thinking extends much deeper into the past than conventional chronology allows. Civilizations may have been rising and falling, developing and losing advanced knowledge systems across time scales that dwarf the neat progressions described in standard historical narratives. Machu Picchu, perched on its mountain ridge like a stone question mark carved into the Andean sky, thus becomes a key piece in a much larger puzzle about the depth and complexity of human civilization. Its stones may preserve not just the achievements of Inca engineers, but the legacy of builders whose names have been forgotten, but whose knowledge echoes across the centuries in mathematical proportions and astronomical alignments that continue to inspire wonder and speculation. The horizon of time stretches far beyond our current ability to measure or comprehend, holding secrets that challenge everything we think we know about who built what, when, and why. Water speaks its own ancient dialect at Machu Picchu, flowing through stone channels carved with a precision that transforms practical necessity into architectural poetry. Listen to the mountain springs as they cascade through fountains designed 5 centuries ago, their voices unchanged since the first builders channeled them through granite conduits that still function with clockwork reliability. This is not simply plumbing. This is hydraulic engineering elevated to the level of sacred art, revealing knowledge of fluid dynamics that challenges assumptions about pre-Columbian technical capabilities. The water management system at Machu Picchu represents one of the site's most remarkable achievements. A network of channels, fountains, and drainage systems captures and distributes water from mountain springs with efficiency that modern engineers struggle to match. The primary water source, a spring located on the north slope of Huayna Picchu, feeds through a carefully designed aqueduct system that delivers fresh water to 16 ornate fountains distributed throughout the citadel. Each fountain receives precisely calculated volumes of water, maintaining consistent flow rates despite variations in elevation and distance from the source. The engineering required to achieve this hydraulic precision speaks to sophisticated understanding of mathematics, geology, and fluid mechanics. The builders somehow calculated the optimal gradients for gravity-fed water distribution across the uneven terrain of the mountain ridge. They understood how to maintain water pressure through changes in elevation, how to prevent erosion in channels carrying mountain runoff, how to create fountains that would function reliably across centuries of continuous operation. But the water system serves purposes that extend far beyond simple practical necessity. The fountains are positioned at specific locations that correspond to the site's astronomical alignments and architectural geometries. Water flows from fountain to fountain in sequence, creating a ritual pathway that connects the most sacred areas of the citadel. The sound of flowing water creates acoustic effects that enhance the spiritual atmosphere of temple spaces and ceremonial plazas. Each fountain displays unique architectural features that transform functional necessity into aesthetic achievement. The carved stone basins, the precisely angled waterspouts, the decorative elements that frame each water source all reflect design philosophies that prioritize beauty alongside utility. The builders understood that water is sacred in Andean cosmology, the life force that connects mountain peaks with valley floors, the medium through which the Apu mountain spirits communicate with human communities. The sophistication of the water management system becomes even more apparent when considering the challenges posed by Machu Picchu East location. The site sits on a narrow mountain ridge exposed to extreme weather variations. Seasonal rains can dump enormous volumes of water on the citadel in short periods, creating flood conditions that could easily damage structures and erode terraced slopes. Dry seasons can reduce spring flows to trickles, threatening water supplies for site occupants. The builders somehow anticipated and planned for these extreme variations. The drainage systems include overflow channels that direct excess water away from vulnerable structures during heavy rains. Storage systems capture and preserve water during abundant periods for use during dry seasons. The entire hydraulic network displays resilience and adaptability that suggests builders who possess detailed knowledge of local climate patterns and hydrology. The acoustic properties of the water channels reveal another layer of sophisticated planning. Water flowing through the stone conduits generates specific musical tones that vary depending on flow rates and channel geometries. Different fountains produce different notes, creating a kind of hydraulic symphony that changes with seasonal variations in water availability. The builders apparently understood principles of hydraulic acoustics that allowed them to tune their water management system like a vast musical instrument. This acoustic dimension suggests purposes that transcend practical water distribution. The sound of flowing water creates meditative atmospheres in temple spaces and ceremonial areas. The musical tones generated by the hydraulic systems could have served ritual purposes, creating sonic environments that enhanced spiritual practices and astronomical observations. The builders may have understood sound as a form of technology, using precisely controlled acoustic effects to achieve psychological and spiritual objectives. The water channels also display evidence of construction techniques that remain mysterious. The stone conduits achieve internal smoothness and geometric precision that require sophisticated understanding of how to work the hard andesite and granite that comprise the system. The joints between channel sections maintain watertight seals without mortar or other bonding agents, relying entirely on precision fitting to prevent leakage. The tool marks preserved in some channels suggest cutting methods that could achieve curved surfaces and precise dimensions across extended lengths of stone conduit. Perhaps most remarkably, several of the water channels appear to have been carved from single blocks of stone, creating internal passages through solid granite without evidence of how access was achieved for the carving work. These monolithic channels display internal geometries that would be extremely difficult to achieve using any known pre-industrial techniques. They suggest either construction methods that have been lost to historical memory or access to tools and technologies more sophisticated than anything attributed to pre-Columbian civilizations. The water management system at Machu Picchu thus reveals builders who possessed knowledge that integrated practical engineering with aesthetic achievement, ritual purposes with acoustic design, mathematical precision with spiritual understanding. They understood water not just as a physical necessity, but as a sacred force that could be channeled and controlled to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously. The fountains continue to flow today, their voices carrying the same messages they have whispered for centuries to visitors willing to listen. They speak of builders who understood the language of water, who could read the mountain's hydrology like a sacred text, who possessed knowledge systems that integrated science and spirituality in ways that modern civilization has largely forgotten. In the eternal conversation between stone and water, between human engineering and mountain springs, the hydraulic achievements of Machu Picchu continue to demonstrate capabilities that challenge everything we think we know about the sophistication of ancient American civilizations. From the earth, Machu Picchu appears as a collection of terraces and buildings arranged with careful attention to the mountain as natural contours. But rise into the thin air above the citadel, soar with the condors that ride thermals rising from the sacred valley far below, and an entirely different pattern emerges from the ancient stones. Viewed from above, the site reveals geometric relationships and symbolic forms that could only have been planned by architects who somehow possessed an aerial perspective on their own creation. This presents one of the most intriguing mysteries surrounding Machu Picchu's construction. How did the builders achieve overall design coherence that is only fully visible from viewpoints they could not have accessed using available technology? The question becomes even more puzzling when the aerial view reveals that the site as layout appears to mirror natural forms, Some researchers suggest it resembles a condor with outstretched wings. Others see the profile of a mountain cat or puma sacred animals in Andean cosmology. The condor interpretation gains credibility from the site's orientation and proportional relationships. The main plaza and temple complex occupy positions that correspond to the bird's body and head, while the agricultural terraces extend like wings spread for flight. The overall dimensions conform to proportions found in actual Andean condors, suggesting architects who somehow understood the site's appearance from an aerial perspective that they should not have been able to achieve. Modern aerial photography has revealed additional geometric patterns that remain invisible to ground-level observation. Lines of sight between specific buildings create angles that correspond to astronomical alignments. The proportional relationships between different areas of the site conform to mathematical constants like the golden ratio. The overall layout displays symmetries and geometric relationships that suggest systematic application of sophisticated design principles across the entire citadel. These patterns raise uncomfortable questions about the technological capabilities available to Machu Picchu's builders. Creating coherent overall designs from aerial perspectives requires either access to elevated viewpoints or systematic mathematical planning that can achieve geometric relationships without direct visual reference. Neither capability seems readily available to pre-Columbian Andean civilizations using accepted technological assumptions. The elevated viewpoint possibility faces obvious challenges. The surrounding peaks tower above Machu Picchu itself, but they are separated by deep valleys and dangerous terrain that would make them impractical as observation platforms for guiding construction activities. Temporary wooden towers tall enough to provide useful aerial perspectives would require engineering capabilities and material resources that seem disproportionate to the benefits they might provide. This leaves mathematical planning as the most likely explanation for the aerial coherence evident in Machu Picchu's design. The builders would have needed to develop detailed geometric models that allowed them to visualize and coordinate the overall layout without direct aerial observation. Such mathematical sophistication implies knowledge systems far more advanced than anything typically attributed to pre-Columbian civilizations. The symbolic forms visible from above add another layer of mystery. If the site was designed to resemble sacred animals when viewed from aerial perspectives, this suggests builders who thought in terms of communication with sky beings, gods, spirits, or perhaps other human populations who possessed flight capabilities. The effort required to achieve recognizable animal forms at architectural scale seems pointless unless the builders expected their creations to be observed from above. Similar aerial mysteries appear at other ancient sites throughout the Americas and around the world. The Nazca lines in southern Peru create enormous ground drawings that are only fully visible from aerial perspectives. The earthwork complexes at Cahokia in Illinois display geometric patterns and astronomical alignments that suggest sophisticated understanding of mathematics and astronomy. The stone arrangements at Carnac in France extend across miles of landscape in patterns that only become apparent when viewed from above. These sites collectively suggest ancient civilizations that possessed either flight capabilities or mathematical knowledge, sophisticated enough to create coherent aerial designs without direct visual reference. The flight possibility seems highly unlikely given the absence of any evidence for ancient aviation technology. This leaves advanced mathematical planning as the most probable explanation. But such planning capabilities imply knowledge systems far more sophisticated than conventional archaeology typically acknowledges. The aerial patterns at Machu Picchu could also reflect symbolic or ritual purposes rather than purely aesthetic considerations. Many ancient cultures viewed the sky as the realm of gods and ancestors, creating ground-based symbols and structures designed to communicate with celestial beings. The apparent animal forms visible from above could represent offerings or communications directed toward sky deities. messages encoded in stone and architectural arrangement. The astronomical alignments integrated into Machu Picchu's layout support this interpretation. The site appears designed to function as a vast astronomical instrument, with building orientations and sightlines calibrated to track celestial movements. Viewed from above, the overall pattern could represent a stone map of the heavens, architectural representation of constellation patterns and astronomical cycles that were central to Andean spiritual and agricultural practices. The precision required to achieve such astronomical and geometric coherence across the entire site speaks to planning capabilities that challenge conventional understanding of pre-Columbian technical knowledge. The builders would have needed sophisticated understanding of surveying techniques, mathematical relationships, and astronomical cycles. They would have required coordination methods capable of maintaining design integrity across the extended construction periods that such a complex project would have demanded. The aerial mysteries of Machu Picchu thus point toward builders who possessed knowledge and capabilities that exceed conventional estimates of pre-Columbian achievement. Whether through advanced mathematical planning or access to elevated perspectives that remain unexplained, they created architectural compositions that display coherence and symbolic meaning that only becomes apparent when viewed from impossible viewpoints. Flying high above the ancient citadel with the condors who still patrol these mountain peaks, modern visitors can observe design achievements that continue to challenge our understanding of who built Machu Picchu, how they planned its construction, and what purposes drove them to create architectural forms that speak most eloquently to observers soaring through the thin air above the clouds. In the cosmology of the Andes, mountains are not mere geological formations, but living entities possessed of consciousness, power, and divine authority. The Apu, the mountain spirits, govern the flow of water and weather, the fertility of crops and herds, the spiritual welfare of human communities that shelter in their shadows. To build upon their slopes is to enter into sacred relationship, to create architecture that must serve not only human purposes, but also the deeper spiritual geometries that connect earth with sky matter, with spirit, the temporal with the eternal. Machu Picchu occupies a position in this sacred landscape that could hardly be more significant. The citadel sits like a stone meditation between Huayna Picchu, the young peak, and Machu Picchu Mountain, the old peak, balanced on a narrow ridge that serves as a bridge between these two powerful Apu. From this position, the site commands views of additional sacred mountains that figure prominently in Andean spiritual geography: Salcante, Veronica, and the peaks that guard the approaches to the Amazon basin stretching eastward toward the sunrise. This positioning appears deliberate rather than coincidental, chosen specifically for its spiritual and astronomical significance rather than purely practical considerations. The effort required to build at such a location, the extraordinary challenges posed by construction on an exposed mountain ridge accessible only by the most treacherous paths, only makes sense if the builders recognized qualities in this specific location that justified the enormous investment of labor and resources required. The architectural elements that comprise Machu Picchu's most sacred spaces reflect this integration of earthly construction with cosmic purpose. The Intihuatana stone, carved from the living bedrock of the mountain itself, serves as a precise astronomical instrument calibrated to track the movement of the sun through seasonal cycles. But beyond its practical function as a calendar and observatory, the stone represents a kind of architectural prayer, a means of connecting human consciousness with the celestial forces that govern agricultural cycles and spiritual understanding. The Temple of the Three Windows frames views of specific constellation patterns at particular times of year, creating openings through which sacred light enters to illuminate ritual spaces at astronomically significant moments. The windows are not mere architectural features, but carefully calibrated instruments for capturing and focusing cosmic energies that Andean spiritual traditions recognize as essential to maintaining harmony between human communities and the natural forces that govern their existence. The overall layout of the citadel appears designed to function as a kind of three-dimensional mandala, an architectural representation of cosmological principles that integrate astronomical observation with spiritual practice. The buildings and plazas, the terraces and pathways all conform to geometric relationships that mirror patterns found in celestial movements and natural cycles. The entire site becomes a stone textbook for understanding the mathematical principles that govern the interaction between Earth and sky. This cosmological sophistication suggests builders who possess not just technical knowledge, but also deep spiritual understanding of their place in the larger patterns that connect human consciousness with cosmic forces. They were not simply constructing buildings, but creating sacred space, architecture that would serve as a bridge between the material and spiritual dimensions of existence. Every stone placement, every architectural alignment, every geometric relationship was chosen to enhance this fundamental purpose of connection and communication with the divine. The water management system that channels mountain springs through the citadel takes on additional significance when viewed through this spiritual lens. In Andean cosmology, water is the blood of the earth, the medium through which the Apu communicate their life-giving power to human communities. The elaborate fountains and channels at Machu Picchu create a hydraulic nervous system that allows the mountain spirits to flow through the architectural body of the citadel, blessing its inhabitants and maintaining the spiritual vitality necessary for the site's cosmic functions. The agricultural terraces that cascade down the mountain slopes represent more than practical farming infrastructure. They transform the mountain itself into a kind of stepped pyramid, an architectural form that connects the underworld realm of Pachamama, the Earth Mother, with the celestial realm of Inti, the Sun Father. Each terrace level represents a different stage in the journey between these cosmic domains, creating agricultural space that serves simultaneously as practical farming area and symbolic representation of spiritual ascension. The acoustic properties of the site's architecture enhance these cosmological functions. Sound carries differently at altitude, and the builders appear to have understood how to use architectural forms to focus and amplify acoustic effects that create appropriate atmospheres for spiritual practice and astronomical observation. The stone surfaces reflect sound in ways that create natural amplification for ceremonial activities. The water channels generate musical tones that provide constant background harmonies for ritual activities. This integration of practical and spiritual purposes reflects a worldview that does not separate secular and sacred, that understands all human activity as participation in cosmic processes that require careful attention to spiritual as well as material considerations. The builders of Machu Picchu operated from philosophical frameworks that prioritized harmony with natural and celestial forces, that saw architecture as a means of participating in the larger patterns that govern the universe. The site's apparent abandonment gains additional significance when understood in this cosmological context. If Machu Picchu was designed primarily as a bridge between earth and sky, a place where human consciousness could commune with cosmic forces, its evacuation might reflect recognition that changing historical circumstances made it impossible to maintain the spiritual purity necessary for its proper functioning. The Spanish conquest brought disruption not just to political and social systems, but to the entire cosmological framework that gave meaning to sacred sites like Machu Picchu. Rather than allowing the sacred space to be corrupted by foreign influences, the guardians might have chosen to abandon the citadel, allowing the jungle to reclaim the terraces, while the most important spiritual knowledge was transferred to other locations where it could be preserved against more favorable times. The stones would remain as testament to the achievement, but the living spiritual functions would withdraw to protect themselves from contamination. Standing today among the ruins as dawn light reveals the mathematical precision of ancient alignments, modern visitors can still sense something of the cosmic awareness that guided Machu Picchu's creation. The site continues to function as a bridge between earth and sky, matter and spirit, the human and the divine. Its stones preserve not just architectural achievement, but spiritual wisdom, cosmic understanding encoded in granite and andesite for those who possess the eyes to see and the patience to listen to what the mountains have always known. In the deepest memories held by Andean oral tradition, there echoes the sound of a world ending. The stories speak of darkness that lasted for days, of the sun disappearing from the sky while the earth shook beneath the feet of terrified survivors. They tell of great waters rising to swallow entire civilizations, of mountains splitting and valleys flooding, of a time when the very foundations of existence seemed to dissolve into chaos and terror. These are not simple mythological tales, but accounts that share remarkable consistency across cultures separated by vast distances and centuries of time. Similar catastrophe stories appear in traditions throughout the Americas and around the world. The Hopi speak of multiple world destructions. The Maya recorded cycles of creation and destruction in their sophisticated calendars. Indigenous Australian traditions preserve memories of great floods and darkness that transformed entire continents. What if these stories preserve actual historical memories of catastrophic events that periodically reshape human civilization? What if Machu Picchu was built not as a royal retreat or religious center in peaceful times, but as a refuge designed to preserve knowledge and population through periods of civilizational collapse? The site's remote location, its defensive positioning, its sophisticated resource management systems all align with the characteristics one would expect from a survival shelter designed to function during extended periods of chaos and disruption. The geological evidence for periodic catastrophic events in the Andes provides sobering context for these oral traditions. The mountain range remains seismically active, regularly experiencing earthquakes capable of leveling cities and reshaping entire valleys. Volcanic activity periodically fills the atmosphere with ash that can block sunlight for extended periods, disrupting agricultural cycles and creating famine conditions across vast regions. Glacial dam bursts and landslides triggered by seismic activity can create massive floods that scour valleys clean of human settlements. But the catastrophe traditions describe events far beyond the normal range of geological hazards. They speak of global disruption, of changes so fundamental that they altered the very relationship between earth and sky, between human communities and the natural forces that sustained them. Such descriptions align with current scientific understanding of periodic cosmic events that can produce climate disruption on scales that dwarf normal geological processes. The Younger Dryas period, approximately 12,900 to 11,700 years ago, provides one example of the kind of rapid climate change that could generate catastrophe memories preserved in oral tradition. During this relatively brief period in geological terms, global temperatures dropped dramatically, ice sheets advanced across previously temperate regions, and sea levels changed rapidly as water froze or melted. The disruption to human communities would have been extraordinary, forcing surviving populations to adapt rapidly or face extinction. More recent research has identified evidence for similar but smaller-scale catastrophic events throughout human history. Volcanic eruptions like Toba, approximately 74,000 years ago, or Laker, c. around 12,900 years ago, produced climate disruption that affected global human populations. Asteroid or comet impacts, while rare, can produce regional or global effects that would devastate complex civilizations dependent on stable agricultural systems and trade networks. Could Machu Picchu represent a response to memories or predictions of such catastrophic possibilities? The site's extraordinary construction costs, its remote location, its sophisticated resource management systems all suggest builders who are planning for survival during extended periods when normal economic and social systems might not function. The agricultural terraces could maintain food production during climate disruption. The water management systems could ensure reliable access to fresh water during droughts or contamination of normal sources. The defensive positioning could protect inhabitants from social chaos accompanying civilizational collapse. The astronomical sophistication built into the site's architecture takes on additional significance in this context. If the builders possessed knowledge of cosmic cycles that produce periodic catastrophic events, they might have designed Machu Picchu to function as an observatory for tracking these cycles and predicting future disruptions. The precision of the astronomical alignments, the mathematical sophistication of the site's geometry, the integration of celestial observation with practical architecture all support this interpretation. Ancient civilizations around the world appear to have possessed sophisticated understanding of astronomical cycles that extend far beyond simple seasonal observation. The Maya tracked planetary movements and eclipse cycles with precision that rivals modern astronomical calculations. The builders of Stonehenge created a monument that predicts solar and lunar events across centuries of observation. The Antikythera mechanism demonstrates that ancient Greek craftsmen could create mechanical computers capable of calculating complex astronomical relationships. If Machu Picchu's builders possessed similar astronomical sophistication, they might have understood cosmic cycles that produce periodic catastrophic events affecting Earth's climate and geological stability. Such knowledge would provide powerful motivation for creating refuges designed to preserve human knowledge and genetic diversity through periods of civilizational disruption. The site's apparent abandonment gains new significance when viewed through this catastrophist lens. Rather than representing defeat by Spanish conquest, the evacuation might reflect successful completion of the site's intended function. If Machu Picchu was designed as a repository for preserving knowledge and population through a predicted catastrophic period, its abandonment might indicate that the dangerous period had passed and that normal civilizational activities could resume in more accessible locations. The knowledge preserved at the site during its period of active use could then have been transferred to other centers, ensuring continuity of crucial information while allowing the mountain refuge to return to the embrace of the jungle that had always been its ultimate protection. The Inca who later discovered and maintained the site might have recognized its significance without fully understanding its original catastrophist purpose. This interpretation transforms Machu Picchu from a monument to Inca achievement into something far more profound, a testament to human foresight and determination, evidence of civilization sophisticated enough to plan for survival across geological timescales. The site becomes a symbol not just of architectural and engineering capability, but of wisdom, a demonstration that ancient peoples possessed understanding of cosmic processes and historical cycles that allowed them to build for permanence in an impermanent world. Standing among the ancient stones as storm clouds gather over the surrounding peaks, modern visitors can sense something of the urgency that might have driven the original construction, the recognition that knowledge and human achievement remain always vulnerable to forces beyond immediate human control. The Pacific stretches away from the Andean peaks like a blue eternity, its horizons hiding possibilities that challenge every assumption about ancient isolation and technological limitation. For centuries, we have imagined pre-Columbian civilizations as isolated islands of development, separated by impossible distances and insurmountable barriers from contact with other advanced cultures. But what if these barriers were not as absolute as we have believed? What if the builders of Machu Picchu drew inspiration and knowledge from sources that spanned oceans? The possibility of ancient transoceanic contact finds intriguing support in architectural and technological parallels between Andean civilizations and cultures on the far side of the Pacific. The precision stonework at Machu Picchu displays striking similarities to megalithic construction techniques found in ancient Egypt, Easter Island, and Southeast Asia. The astronomical sophistication built into the site's architecture echoes knowledge systems developed by civilizations separated from the Andes by thousands of miles of ocean. Consider the parallels with Easter Island, that remote speck of land lost in the vastness of the Pacific. The island's famous Moai statues were carved from volcanic stone using techniques that achieve precision, approaching that found in Andean architecture. The platforms on which the statues stand display stonework that rivals the finest masonry at Machu Picchu in its precision and sophistication. Most significantly, Easter Island oral traditions speak of multiple waves of settlement by peoples arriving from different directions across the ocean, suggesting ancient Pacific navigation capabilities far exceeding anything recognized by mainstream archaeology. The Polynesian achievement in ocean navigation provides compelling evidence that ancient peoples possessed technological and knowledge systems capable of spanning vast oceanic distances. Using star navigation techniques, ocean current awareness, and sophisticated understanding of weather patterns, Polynesian navigators successfully colonized islands scattered across the entire Pacific basin. They accomplished feats of exploration and colonization that European maritime technology could not match until the development of accurate chronometers in the 18th century. If Polynesian navigators could successfully navigate the Pacific using traditional technologies, why should we assume that other ancient peoples lacked similar capabilities? The archaeological evidence suggests that sophisticated maritime cultures existed throughout the Pacific Rim, thousands of years before Columbus ventured into the Atlantic. These cultures possessed the technological knowledge and navigational skills necessary for transoceanic contact between civilizations separated by vast distances. The parallels extend beyond simple architectural similarities to encompass more fundamental aspects of technological and intellectual achievement. The mathematical sophistication evident in Machu Picchu's design finds echoes in the geometric principles underlying Egyptian pyramid construction, the astronomical alignments of Angkor Wat, and the proportional relationships governing ancient Chinese architecture. These similarities could represent independent development of similar principles, but they could also reflect knowledge transfer between civilizations connected by ancient maritime networks. The agricultural terraces at Machu Picchu display engineering principles that appear in modified forms throughout the Pacific world. Similar terracing techniques appear in ancient Chinese agriculture, Indonesian rice cultivation, and Polynesian agricultural systems adapted to volcanic island environments. While terracing represents a logical response to mountainous terrain in many locations, the specific techniques for preventing erosion, managing water flow, and maximizing growing space show remarkable consistency across cultures supposedly isolated from each other. The astronomical knowledge built into Machu Picchu's architecture displays even more striking parallels with distant civilizations. The site's solar alignments mirror techniques found in Egyptian temples, Mayan observatories, and ancient Chinese astronomical installations. The precision of these alignments, the mathematical relationships they embody, the integration of astronomical observation with religious and practical architecture, all suggest sophisticated knowledge systems that required centuries or millennia to develop and refine. Could such complex knowledge systems have developed independently in multiple isolated locations? Or do these parallels suggest ancient networks of communication and exchange that spanned oceanic distances? The latter possibility opens fascinating questions about the sophistication and extent of ancient maritime civilizations that may have connected the Pacific Rim in ways that conventional archaeology has not yet recognized. The genetic evidence for ancient transoceanic contact remains controversial but suggestive. DNA studies of pre-Columbian populations throughout the Americas have revealed unexpected genetic markers that suggest contact with populations from across the Pacific. While these findings remain subject to debate and alternative interpretation, they provide potential support for oral traditions and archaeological evidence pointing toward ancient maritime contact between the Americas and other Pacific civilizations. The sweet potato provides one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for pre-Columbian trans-Pacific contact. This South American crop appears in Polynesian agricultural systems long before European contact, suggesting either Polynesian voyages to South America or South American voyages to Polynesia during ancient periods. The linguistic evidence supports this biological evidence. Polynesian names for the sweet potato show clear relationships to South American indigenous terms for the same crop. If ancient peoples possessed the navigational knowledge and maritime technology necessary for trans-Pacific contact, the implications for understanding Machu Picchu become profound. The site might represent not just the isolated achievement of Andean civilization, but rather a node in ancient networks of knowledge exchange that spanned oceanic distances. The architectural sophistication, the astronomical knowledge, the mathematical principles embedded in the site's design could reflect synthesis of technological and intellectual traditions drawn from across the Pacific world. This interpretation transforms our understanding of ancient human capability and achievement. Rather than isolated pockets of primitive development, pre-Columbian civilizations begin to appear as sophisticated participants in global networks of exploration, trade, and knowledge exchange. The builders of Machu Picchu emerge not as isolated geniuses working within narrow technological limitations, but as skilled architects drawing upon knowledge traditions that spanned continents and oceans. The Pacific wind that rises from the jungle valleys below Machu Picchu carries whispers of these ancient connections, suggestions of knowledge networks and maritime achievements that challenge every assumption about the limitations and isolation of pre-Columbian civilizations. Beneath the accepted chronology of Inca achievement, shadows move through the archaeological record, like memories too ancient to name. What if the precision stonework that defines Machu Picchu's most sacred spaces was already ancient when Pachacutic's engineers first climbed these mountain paths? What if the Inca inherited rather than created the citadel's most sophisticated features, building their own structures around and upon foundations laid by architects whose names have been erased from every record save the stones themselves? This possibility transforms our understanding of Machu Picchu from a testament to Inca engineering prowess into something far more mysterious, a palimpsest of construction, where multiple civilizations have left their marks across centuries or millennia of building, rebuilding, and renovation. The varying quality of stonework throughout the site begins to make sense as evidence not of different construction phases within a single cultural tradition, but of different cultures entirely, each working according to their own technical capabilities and architectural philosophies. The finest masonry at Machu Picchu achieves levels of precision that seem to transcend the technological limitations typically attributed to pre-Columbian civilizations. Blocks fitted with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters, surfaces ground to mirror-like smoothness, complex three-dimensional geometries that require mathematical sophistication approaching modern standards. This work displays characteristics that set it apart, not just from typical Inca construction, but from any known pre-industrial building techniques. Could these achievements represent the work of unknown architects, builders whose civilization flourished and vanished before the Inca expansion into the Sacred Valley? The possibility finds support in geological evidence suggesting that the finest stonework has been exposed to weathering for periods far exceeding the conventional chronology. The surface patina, the accumulation of mineral deposits, the subtle erosion patterns all point toward much greater age than the 5 or 6 centuries allowed by standard archaeological dating. The tool marks preserved on these ancient blocks present additional mysteries. Where they remain visible, these marks suggest cutting implements that maintain sharp edges and precise geometries across enormous stone surfaces. The hardness of andesite and granite should have rapidly dulled any bronze or stone cutting tools available to pre-Columbian civilizations. Yet the tool marks indicate cutting edges that function with consistent precision throughout extended operations on the most challenging stone types. This suggests either access to cutting technologies more sophisticated than anything in the accepted archaeological record, or construction techniques that achieved impossible results through methods that remain completely mysterious. The first possibility opens uncomfortable questions about the technological capabilities of ancient civilizations. The second challenges our understanding of what is physically possible using pre-industrial methods and materials. The integration of the finest stonework with later additions provides clues to the chronological relationships between different building phases. In several locations, clearly Inca-style construction abuts or incorporates blocks that display the precision characteristics of the ancient masonry. The Inca work, while competent and impressive by any normal standard, lacks the surgical precision of the incorporated blocks. The contrast suggests later builders working around and with existing structures that they recognized as too valuable or sacred to disturb. This pattern appears throughout the site, with Inca additions and modifications clearly distinguishable from earlier work of much higher precision. The relationship resembles archaeological evidence from other locations where later civilizations have built upon the foundations left by more sophisticated predecessors. At sites like Baalbek in Lebanon or the Giza complex in Egypt, megalithic blocks of extraordinary precision are incorporated into later construction that, while impressive, clearly represents different technological traditions. The possibility of unknown predecessor civilizations at Machu Picchu aligns with growing archaeological evidence for much longer and more complex human development in the Americas than conventional chronology allows. Sites like Carol in Peru, Poverty Point in Louisiana, and Monte Alto in Guatemala preserve evidence of sophisticated civilizations that predate anything previously recognized in their regions by thousands of years. These discoveries suggest waves of cultural development and decline that operated on much longer time scales than traditional archaeological frameworks acknowledge. The oral traditions preserved in Andean cultures provide additional support for the predecessor hypothesis. Stories consistently speak of earlier builders, beings of extraordinary knowledge and capability who worked stone with supernatural ease and created monuments designed to endure across geological time. These traditions describe multiple waves of civilization, with each succeeding culture inheriting and maintaining the achievements of their predecessors while adding their own contributions according to their particular capabilities and purposes. If Machu Picchu represents such a palimpsest of construction, the site becomes exponentially more significant as a repository of human achievement across extended time periods. Rather than documenting the capabilities of a single civilization, it preserves evidence of multiple cultural traditions, each contributing according to their particular strengths and knowledge systems. The most ancient work demonstrates technical capabilities that challenge our understanding of what pre-industrial civilizations could achieve. The intermediate phases show adaptation and maintenance of inherited structures. The final Inca period represents sophisticated renovation and expansion by architects who recognized the site as sacred significance, even if they could not fully replicate the technical achievements of earlier builders. This interpretation could explain many of the anomalies that challenge conventional archaeological analysis. The precision stonework becomes the product of civilizations with much longer development periods and possibly different technological traditions than anything recognized in the historical record. The astronomical sophistication reflects knowledge systems accumulated across millennia of continuous observation and refinement. The site's apparent abandonment represents not the collapse of a single civilization, but the withdrawal of the most recent guardians who recognized their responsibility to protect ancient achievements from the disruption of foreign conquest. The unseen architects who may have laid Machu Picchu's foundations thus become key figures in a much larger mystery about the depth and complexity of human civilization in the Americas. Their work whispers of capabilities and knowledge systems that exceed everything we thought we understood about pre-Columbian achievement, challenging us to expand our vision of what ancient peoples might have accomplished given sufficient time, knowledge, and motivation. In the high-tech laboratories where ancient genetic material yields its most intimate secrets, The DNA extracted from pre-Columbian Andean remains tells stories that complicate every simple narrative about indigenous American populations. The double helix preserves information that spans millennia, carrying genetic messages from populations that lived and died long before European contact disrupted the isolation of the Americas. But these molecular messages contain unexpected elements, genetic signatures that point toward influences and populations that do not fit neatly into established models of American prehistory. The genetic analysis of ancient Andean mummies has revealed population structures of surprising complexity, rather than the relatively homogeneous indigenous groups that conventional models might predict. The ancient DNA shows evidence of multiple population layers with distinct genetic characteristics. Some remains display genetic markers typical of indigenous American populations that arrived via the Bering Land Bridge during the Pleistocene. But others show genetic signatures that suggest different origins, populations that may have arrived via different routes or at different times. Most intriguingly, some ancient Andean remains display genetic characteristics that appear to have Caucasoid or even Polynesian affinities, suggesting either direct contact with populations from across the Pacific or the presence of founding populations with genetic heritage that does not conform to standard models of American colonization. While these findings remain controversial and subject to alternative interpretation, they provide potential genetic support for oral traditions that describe ancient builders with physical characteristics differing significantly from typical indigenous Andean populations. The genetic evidence for the Viracocha traditions takes on particular significance in this context. The oral traditions consistently describe these ancient builders as tall, fair-skinned, and bearded, with physical characteristics that distinguish them markedly from the indigenous Andean populations among whom they worked. Such descriptions could represent mythological embellishment of more ordinary historical figures, but they could also preserve genetic memory of actual populations whose physical characteristics reflected different genetic heritage than typical indigenous American groups. The timing of these genetic influences presents additional puzzles. Some of the anomalous genetic signatures appear in remains that date to periods well before any accepted models for transoceanic contact with the Americas. This suggests either much earlier contact between American and Old World populations than conventional chronology allows, or founding populations whose genetic diversity exceeded anything recognized in current models of American colonization. The mitochondrial DNA evidence provides particularly intriguing clues. Mitochondrial DNA passers from mother to child without recombination, providing clear lineages that can be traced back through thousands of generations. Most indigenous American populations display mitochondrial DNA lineages that clearly derive from Asian populations that crossed the Bering Land Bridge. But some ancient Andean remains show mitochondrial lineages that appear to have different origins, suggesting maternal lines that may derive from populations not included in the standard Bering migration model. The Y chromosome evidence, which traces paternal lineages, shows similar anomalies. Some ancient Andean males carry Y chromosome markers that suggest paternal lines with possible Polynesian or even European affinities. While contamination and misinterpretation remain possible explanations for these findings, they align with other evidence pointing toward ancient American populations of greater genetic diversity than conventional models predict. The implications for understanding Machu Picchu's builders become profound if these genetic anomalies represent actual ancient populations rather than analytical artifacts. The precision stonework, the astronomical sophistication, the mathematical knowledge embedded in the site's architecture could reflect the achievements of populations whose genetic heritage included influences from advanced civilizations across the Pacific or even the Atlantic. The genetic evidence also aligns with archaeological findings that suggest ancient American civilizations possessed technological and intellectual capabilities far exceeding anything attributed to isolated hunter-gatherer populations. If the builders of Machu Picchu included populations with genetic connections to advanced Old World civilizations, their achievements become more comprehensible within frameworks of ancient knowledge transfer and technological diffusion. The morphological evidence from ancient skulls provides additional support for the genetic findings. Some pre-Columbian Andean remains display cranial characteristics that differ significantly from typical indigenous American morphology. These differences include features associated with populations from other continental regions, suggesting either direct genetic contributions from non-American populations or founding groups with greater morphological diversity than standard models allow. The dental evidence shows similar patterns, with some ancient Andean populations displaying tooth morphology that suggests genetic influences not typical of indigenous American groups. These morphological anomalies align with the genetic evidence to suggest ancient American populations of much greater complexity and diversity than conventional models predict. The preservation conditions in high-altitude Andean environments have allowed recovery of genetic material from remains dating back thousands of years, providing unprecedented opportunities to study ancient American population genetics across extended time periods. This temporal depth reveals population dynamics that appear much more complex than simple models of isolated indigenous development would suggest. The genetic silence that followed European contact creates additional interpretive challenges. Disease epidemics and population disruption associated with conquest eliminated many indigenous genetic lineages, creating gaps in the genetic record that make it difficult to trace connections between ancient and modern populations. The anomalous genetic signatures found in pre-Columbian remains might represent lineages that were completely eliminated during the conquest period, leaving no modern descendants to clarify their origins and relationships. The DNA evidence thus preserves traces of ancient American populations whose genetic heritage included influences that challenge simple models of indigenous isolation and independent development. These genetic whispers suggest builders whose capabilities might have reflected knowledge traditions and technological influences drawn from across oceanic distances populations whose achievements at sites like Machu Picchu become comprehensible as products of ancient networks of contact and exchange rather than isolated indigenous development. In the molecular silence of ancient genetic codes, the shadows of unknown populations continue to challenge everything we thought we understood about who built the monuments that continue to inspire wonder across the centuries. Above the mist-shrouded peaks of the Andes, the same constellations that guided ancient architects still wheel through their eternal dance. The stars that rise over Machu Picchu each night carry messages encoded in mathematical relationships and celestial mechanics, speaking in the universal language of astronomy that transcends cultural boundaries and temporal limitations. But to understand these stellar communications, one must learn to see the citadel not merely as earthbound architecture, but as a three-dimensional star map rendered in stone and aligned with cosmic precision to mirror the heavens themselves. The astronomical sophistication built into Machu Picchu extends far beyond simple solar observation. While the Intihuatana stone functions as an elegant sundial and seasonal calendar, tracking the sun's movement through solstices and equinoxes with remarkable precision, the site's celestial alignments encompass much more complex astronomical relationships. Building orientations, window placements, and sightlines between structures create observational instruments capable of tracking planetary movements, stellar positions, and astronomical cycles that span centuries or millennia. The Temple of the Three Windows provides perhaps the most dramatic example of architectural astronomy at the site. Each window frames specific portions of the sky, capturing constellation patterns and planetary positions at astronomically significant moments throughout the year. During the winter solstice, the central window perfectly frames the rising of the Pleiades constellation, that tight cluster of stars that figured prominently in Andean agricultural and ceremonial calendars. The precision of this alignment requires sophisticated understanding of both stellar mechanics and architectural geometry. But the Pleiades alignment reveals knowledge that extends far beyond seasonal observation. The constellation S position relative to other stellar objects changes slowly over time due to the precession of the equinoxes, that gradual wobble in Earth's axis that creates a 26,000-year cycle in the apparent position of stars. The temple's windows appear calibrated, not just for contemporary Pleiades positions, but for the constellation's location across multiple precessional cycles. This suggests astronomical knowledge that encompasses timescales far exceeding human lifespans, planning that anticipated stellar positions across geological rather than historical time periods. The overall layout of Machu Picchu mirrors celestial patterns in ways that transform the entire citadel into an architectural representation of astronomical relationships. The positioning of major buildings corresponds to the arrangement of prominent star groups in the southern sky. The sacred plaza aligns with the constellation's Southern Cross, while the residential areas mirror the star patterns of the Milky Way's brightest regions. Walking through the citadel becomes a kind of terrestrial journey through stellar geography, architectural pilgrimage through stone representations of cosmic topography. The mathematical relationships underlying these astronomical alignments reveal knowledge of homage, geometric principles that approach modern standards of precision. The angles between building orientations conform to the mathematical constants that govern planetary orbits and stellar mechanics. The proportional relationships between different areas of the site mirror the harmonic ratios found in astronomical cycles and celestial mechanics. The entire complex functions as a kind of analog computer, using architectural relationships to calculate and predict astronomical events with remarkable accuracy. The water channel system takes on additional significance when viewed through this astronomical lens. The fountains are positioned at locations that correspond to specific star positions, creating a hydraulic map of stellar relationships. Water flows from fountain to fountain in sequence, mimicking the apparent movement of stars across the night sky. During certain astronomical events, the sound of water flowing through the stone channels creates acoustic effects that enhance observation of celestial phenomena. The agricultural terraces display similar integration of practical and astronomical functions. The terrace orientations optimize both agricultural efficiency and astronomical observation, creating growing spaces that double as observational platforms for tracking celestial events. The stone walls that retain the terraces are oriented to frame specific portions of the sky, transforming the entire mountainside into a vast amphitheater designed for astronomical observation and ceremony. The precision of these astronomical alignments suggests builders who possess detailed star catalogs and sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. Creating architectural alignments that remain accurate across centuries requires knowledge of stellar proper motion, precession effects, and long-term astronomical cycles. Such knowledge represents the accumulation of observational data across many generations, the kind of institutional continuity that allows complex astronomical traditions to develop and mature. The similarities between Machu Picchu's astronomical features and those found at other ancient sites around the world suggest participation in global traditions of astronomical knowledge. The stellar alignments at the citadel mirror techniques found in Egyptian temples, Mayan observatories, and megalithic sites throughout Europe and Asia. While these similarities could represent independent development of similar astronomical principles, they could also reflect ancient networks of knowledge exchange that connected civilizations across oceanic distances. The constellation patterns emphasized in Machu Picchu's alignments provide clues to the astronomical traditions that guided its construction. The Southern Cross, the Pleiades, and the bright stars of the Milky Way all figure prominently in the site's celestial geometry. These same stellar objects appear in the astronomical traditions of civilizations throughout the Pacific world, suggesting possible connections between Andean astronomy and stellar knowledge systems developed by maritime cultures capable of transoceanic navigation. The lunar alignments built into the site's architecture add another layer of astronomical sophistication. Several structures are oriented to track the complex cycles of lunar motion, including the 18.6-year Saros cycle that governs eclipse patterns. Such knowledge requires centuries of careful observation to detect and measure, suggesting astronomical traditions with institutional continuity far exceeding the brief flowering of Inca civilization. The planetary alignments incorporated into Machu Picchu's design demonstrate knowledge of celestial mechanics that approaches modern understanding of solar system dynamics. Certain building orientations track the movements of Venus, Mars, and Jupiter with precision that requires sophisticated mathematical analysis of planetary orbital mechanics, creating architectural features that predict planetary positions across extended time periods demands astronomical knowledge of extraordinary sophistication. Standing among Machu Picchu's ruins as the southern constellations rise above the Andean peaks, modern visitors can still observe the astronomical relationships that guided ancient architects. The stars continue their eternal dance, carrying the same messages that inspired builders to create architectural interpretations of cosmic patterns. In the silence between stellar observations, the citadel continues to function as a bridge between Earth and sky, matter and mathematics, human achievement and cosmic understanding. The astronomical sophistication preserved in Machu Picchu's stones thus becomes evidence not just of ancient observational skill, but of intellectual achievement that transcends the limitations typically attributed to pre-Columbian civilizations, pointing toward knowledge traditions that integrated practical architecture with sophisticated understanding of humanity's place in the cosmic order. In the heart of Machu Picchu's most sacred precinct, where ancient stones frame views of peaks that pierce the sky like prayers made manifest, the architecture whispers of principles that transcend mere engineering achievement. Here, carved into the living rock of the mountain itself, the builders created spaces that celebrate not conquest or dominion, but harmony, the sacred marriage between earth and sky, matter and spirit, the masculine principle of solar fire and the feminine essence of terrestrial abundance that Andean peoples call Pachamama, the Earth Mother. The Temple of the Condor reveals this sacred feminine principle through architectural forms that mirror the goddess herself. The natural rock formation at the temple's heart resembles the female reproductive anatomy, transformed through subtle carving into an altar that celebrates fertility and life-giving power. Water channels direct mountain springs through the sacred space, creating the flow of life essence that connects the temple with the broader hydraulic nervous system that carries Pachamama's blood through the entire citadel. This is not merely symbolic representation, but functional sacred technology, architecture designed to channel and focus the Earth's feminine creative energy for healing, divination, and spiritual transformation. The acoustic properties of the space amplify sound in ways that create natural reverberation chambers for ceremonial activities. The astronomical alignments ensure that celestial light penetrates the sacred space at moments when astronomical cycles intersect with the Earth's seasonal rhythms of fertility and abundance. The agricultural terraces that cascade down Machu Picchu's slopes take on profound significance when understood through this lens of sacred feminine geography. Each terrace level represents not merely practical farming space, but a step in the Earth Goddess's body, agricultural architecture that transforms the entire mountain into a living representation of Pachamama herself. The stone retaining walls become the ribs that support her terrestrial flesh, while the water channels that flow between terraces carry her life-giving essence to nourish the crops that sustain human communities. The builders understood agriculture not as exploitation of natural resources, but as participation in sacred relationship with the earth as creative forces. The terrace systems at Machu Picchu display engineering principles that work with rather than against natural processes, creating growing spaces that enhance rather than deplete soil fertility across centuries of continuous cultivation. This represents agricultural technology based on principles of reciprocity and respect for the Earth's regenerative capabilities. The positioning of Machu Picchu itself reflects this integration of sacred feminine principles with astronomical and geographical considerations. The citadel occupies a location that places it in direct relationship with Salcante, the sacred snow peak that Andean tradition identifies as a powerful feminine Apu, a mountain spirit whose glacial waters feed the rivers that nourish the entire sacred valley. The site serves as an architectural bridge between this feminine mountain presence and the masculine solar energies, tracked by the Intihuatana stone and other astronomical features. The water management system throughout Machu Picchu functions as architectural representation of the Earth Goddess's circulatory system. The 16 fountains that distribute mountain spring water through the citadel are positioned at locations that correspond to energy centers in the human body, creating hydraulic acupuncture points that channel terrestrial life force through the architectural organism of the site. Each fountain displays unique carved features that transform functional water distribution into aesthetic celebration of the sacred feminine principle. The acoustic properties of these fountains add another dimension to their sacred function. Water flowing through the carved stone basins generates specific musical tones that create harmonic resonances throughout the citadel. These hydraulic harmonies provide constant background music for ceremonial activities, acoustic environments that enhance meditation, healing practices, and astronomical observation. The builders understood sound as spiritual technology, using precisely tuned acoustic effects to create psychological and physiological states conducive to sacred activities. The residential areas of Machu Picchu reflect this sacred feminine influence through architectural features that prioritize harmony with natural forces rather than dominance over them. Buildings are oriented to capture beneficial solar energy while protecting inhabitants from harsh weather. Window placements maximize natural light while maintaining privacy and security. Interior spaces create atmospheres conducive to rest, contemplation, and family activities that sustain community relationships across generations. The integration of practical and sacred functions throughout Machu Picchu reflects worldviews that do not separate secular and spiritual, that understand all human activity as participation in sacred relationships with natural and celestial forces. This represents philosophical frameworks much more sophisticated than the primitive animism typically attributed to pre-Columbian cultures. The builders operated from cosmological understanding that recognized the entire universe as a living organism, with human communities serving as conscious participants in cosmic processes that require careful attention to principles of balance and reciprocity. The apparent abandonment of Machu Picchu gains additional significance when understood through this sacred feminine perspective. Rather than representing military defeat or economic collapse, the site's evacuation might reflect recognition that changing historical circumstances made it impossible to maintain the spiritual purity necessary for the sacred feminine energies to function properly. The Spanish conquest brought not just political disruption, but cosmological contamination, foreign spiritual influences that threatened to corrupt the delicate balance between masculine and feminine forces that gave meaning to sacred sites like Machu Picchu. The guardians of the site might have chosen strategic withdrawal rather than spiritual contamination, allowing the jungle to reclaim the terraces, while the most important sacred knowledge was transferred to other locations, where it could be preserved until more favorable times allowed its restoration. The architectural organism would remain as testament to the achievement, but its living spiritual functions would withdraw to protect themselves from foreign influences that could not understand or respect the sacred feminine principles that animated the site's deepest purposes. Modern visitors who approach Machu Picchu with respect for these sacred feminine principles often report profound emotional and spiritual experiences that transcend ordinary tourist encounters. The site continues to function as a place where the Earth Goddess's presence can be directly experienced, where architectural spaces facilitate connection with natural and celestial forces that mainstream modern culture has largely forgotten. The stones preserve not just engineering achievement, but spiritual wisdom, knowledge of how human consciousness can participate harmoniously in the cosmic dance between earth and sky, matter and spirit, the eternal masculine and feminine principles that create and sustain all life. The rise and fall of civilizations follows patterns as predictable as seasonal cycles. Yet each culture believes itself eternal until the moment its foundations crack and its certainties dissolve into historical memory. Across the millennia, empires have risen from obscurity to dominate vast territories, accumulate sophisticated knowledge, build monuments of breathtaking ambition, and then fade into legends that their successors dismiss as primitive mythology. What if Machu Picchu stands as testament not to a single civilization's achievement, but to this eternal cycle of cultural forgetting and rediscovery? The phenomenon appears throughout human history with striking consistency. The sophisticated Bronze Age civilizations of the Mediterranean collapsed so completely that classical Greeks regarded the massive walls at Tiryns and Mycene as the work of Cyclops, one-eyed giants whose capabilities exceeded normal human limits. Medieval Europeans wandering among Roman ruins attributed them to supernatural forces, unable to comprehend how their ancestors had achieved such architectural and engineering sophistication. Renaissance scholars rediscovering Greek manuscripts expressed amazement at mathematical and scientific knowledge that seemed impossibly advanced for ancient thinkers. This pattern of cultural amnesia operates through well-understood mechanisms. Catastrophic events, wars, plagues, climate changes, economic collapses can disrupt the institutional continuity necessary for preserving complex knowledge systems. When libraries burn, when schools close, when master craftsmen die without passing their skills to apprentices, sophisticated techniques can vanish within a single generation. The survivors retain fragments of knowledge, stories and traditions that preserve partial memories, but the systematic understanding that made great achievements possible disappears. The Spanish conquest of the Andes provides a perfect case study in how rapidly sophisticated civilizations can be reduced to archaeological puzzles. Within decades of European contact, disease epidemics eliminated up to 90% of indigenous populations. Political disruption destroyed administrative systems that had governed territories larger than the Roman Empire at its height. Forced conversion to Christianity eliminated religious traditions that had preserved astronomical knowledge and mathematical understanding across centuries of institutional continuity. The conquistadors who marveled at Inca engineering capabilities could barely comprehend how a civilization without wheels, iron tools, or written language had achieved such remarkable results. They attributed Inca achievements to supernatural assistance, demonic intervention, or the work of earlier civilizations that had possessed capabilities that contemporary indigenous populations had lost. The possibility that they were witnessing the decline rather than the peak of Andean achievement rarely occurred to European observers, convinced of their own technological and cultural superiority. But what if the Spanish conquistadors were correct in their intuition that contemporary Inca capabilities could not fully account for the monuments they encountered? What if sites like Machu Picchu preserve evidence of Andean civilizations that had achieved levels of sophistication far exceeding anything the Inca themselves could create? The precision stonework, the astronomical knowledge, the mathematical understanding built into the site's architecture might represent the achievements of earlier cultures whose capabilities were already becoming legendary by the time Inca expansion reached the Sacred Valley. This interpretation aligns with evidence from other parts of the world where archaeological investigation has revealed cycles of civilization that operate on much longer time scales than conventional history recognizes. In Egypt, the sophisticated knowledge displayed in pyramid construction appears suddenly in the archaeological record without clear developmental antecedents, suggesting either rapid development of complex techniques or inheritance of knowledge from predecessor civilizations whose achievements have been lost to historical memory. The megalithic sites scattered throughout Europe display similar patterns of sophisticated achievement that seems to exceed the capabilities typically attributed to Neolithic cultures. Stonehenge, Newgrange, and the stone circles of Scotland required astronomical knowledge and mathematical understanding that supposedly primitive cultures should not have possessed. Yet the archaeological evidence clearly demonstrates that these monuments were built by societies that conventional chronology places in the early stages of agricultural development. The Inca themselves preserved oral traditions that described earlier builders whose capabilities exceeded their own. The stories of Viracocha and other ancient architects consistently portray beings who could work stone with supernatural ease, who possessed knowledge of astronomy and mathematics far exceeding normal human capabilities, who built monuments designed to endure across geological timescales. These traditions might preserve actual memories of predecessor civilizations whose achievements were so far beyond Inca capabilities that they could only be remembered as supernatural intervention. The architectural evidence at Machu Picchu supports this interpretation of cultural layering across extended time periods. The varying quality of stonework throughout the site suggests multiple construction phases by builders with dramatically different technical capabilities. The finest masonry displays precision that seems to transcend pre-industrial limitations, while other areas show competent but more conventional construction techniques typical of known Inca capabilities. The relationship resembles archaeological sites where later cultures have built upon foundations left by more sophisticated predecessors. The pattern of cultural forgetting helps explain why advanced ancient achievements so often seem impossible to their own successors. Each generation inherits fragments of earlier knowledge, but lacks the institutional frameworks necessary to preserve and transmit complex technical understanding. Skills that required centuries to develop can disappear within decades if the social structures that support them collapse. The survivors retain stories and traditions, but the systematic knowledge disappears. Machu Picchu thus becomes a monument, not just to Inca achievement, but to the eternal cycle of cultural development, decline, and rediscovery that characterizes human civilization. The site preserves evidence of multiple cultural layers, each building upon the achievements of predecessors, while adding their own contributions according to their particular capabilities and purposes. The most ancient work demonstrates technical achievements that challenge current understanding of pre-industrial capabilities. The intermediate phases show adaptation and maintenance of inherited structures. The final Inca period represents sophisticated renovation by architects who recognize the site as sacred significance, even if they could not fully replicate the technical achievements of earlier builders. The abandonment of Machu Picchu follows this same pattern of cultural forgetting. Rather than representing simple military defeat, the site as evacuation might reflect the Guardian's recognition that changing circumstances made it impossible to maintain the knowledge traditions necessary for the site as proper function. The Spanish conquest threatened not just political independence, but the cosmological frameworks that gave meaning to astronomical observation, mathematical understanding, and architectural achievement. Better to abandon the site than allow its sacred knowledge to be corrupted or destroyed by foreign influences that could not comprehend its deeper purposes. In the eternal cycle of forgetting and remembering, Machu Picchu stands as a reminder that human achievement extends far deeper into the past than conventional chronology allows, challenging us to recognize that our ancestors' capabilities may have exceeded our own in ways we have not yet learned to appreciate or understand. In the marble corridors of universities and the climate-controlled archives of archaeological institutions, a curious phenomenon occurs when researchers encounter evidence that challenges established paradigms. The human mind, even the trained scholarly mind, displays remarkable creativity in avoiding conclusions that threaten comfortable assumptions about the past. Like water flowing around a boulder, academic discourse finds ways to circumvent uncomfortable evidence, creating elaborate theoretical structures that preserve orthodox chronologies while explaining away anomalies that point toward more revolutionary interpretations. This institutionalized resistance to paradigm-shifting discoveries operates through well-understood psychological and professional mechanisms. Careers are built on established frameworks. Funding depends on research proposals that align with accepted theories. Peer review systems reward incremental advances within existing paradigms while treating revolutionary interpretations with deep suspicion. Graduate students learn quickly that questioning fundamental assumptions about human prehistory represents a path toward professional marginalization rather than academic advancement. The result is a kind of intellectual inertia that can persist for decades, even in the face of mounting contradictory evidence. The sophisticated astronomical knowledge built into sites like Machu Picchu is explained away as coincidental alignment or primitive superstition rather than recognized as evidence for advanced understanding of celestial mechanics. The precision stonework is attributed to patience and primitive tools rather than acknowledged as achievement that approaches the limits of what seems possible using pre-industrial methods. The mathematical sophistication evident in architectural proportions is dismissed as unconscious aesthetic sense rather than recognized as systematic application of geometric principles. This pattern of evidence avoidance becomes particularly pronounced when archaeological discoveries threaten narratives about cultural superiority and technological progress that remain central to modern Western identity. The assumption that human civilization follows a linear progression from primitive to sophisticated, with European culture representing the pinnacle of achievement, makes it difficult to acknowledge that ancient American civilizations might have possessed capabilities exceeding those of their European contemporaries. Such acknowledgement would require fundamental revision of comfortable assumptions about cultural hierarchy and technological development. The political dimensions of archaeological interpretation add another layer of complexity to these issues. Indigenous populations throughout the Americas have experienced centuries of cultural suppression and political marginalization. Acknowledging the sophisticated achievements of their ancestors might strengthen contemporary claims for cultural respect and political autonomy. Archaeological institutions and government agencies that benefit from maintaining existing power structures thus have institutional incentives to minimize rather than maximize recognition of ancient American achievements. The specialization that characterizes modern academic research creates additional barriers to revolutionary interpretation. Archaeologists focus on pottery shards and settlement patterns, while astronomers study celestial mechanics and mathematicians explore geometric relationships. The interdisciplinary knowledge necessary to recognize the sophisticated integration of archaeological, astronomical, and mathematical evidence at sites like Machu Picchu rarely exists within single research programs. Evidence that might seem compelling when viewed holistically gets fragmented across disciplinary boundaries that prevent comprehensive analysis. The temporal chauvinism that assumes recent developments represent improvements over ancient achievements further complicates scholarly interpretation. Modern researchers struggle to imagine that ancient peoples might have possessed knowledge or capabilities that contemporary civilization has lost. The possibility that sophisticated techniques for working stone, predicting astronomical events, or integrating architectural and mathematical principles might have been developed and then forgotten challenges assumptions about linear progress that remain central to modern worldviews. The commercial interests that surround archaeological sites create additional pressures toward conventional interpretation. Tourism industries, museum exhibits, and educational programs require simple narratives that can be easily communicated to general audiences. the complex, interdisciplinary evidence that points toward revolutionary interpretations of sites like Machu Picchu cannot be easily packaged into the bite-sized explanations that commercial tourism demands. Economic incentives thus favor conventional interpretations over revolutionary possibilities that might confuse or challenge tourist expectations. The linguistic barriers that separate ancient knowledge systems from modern analytical frameworks add another layer of interpretive difficulty. Many sophisticated concepts in ancient astronomy, mathematics, and engineering were encoded in symbolic systems, oral traditions, and architectural relationships rather than written texts accessible to contemporary scholars. The knowledge required to decode these ancient information systems has been largely lost, making it difficult for modern researchers to recognize or interpret evidence for advanced ancient achievements. The technological biases that equate sophistication with particular material technologies create additional blind spots in archaeological interpretation. Modern scholars trained to recognize bronze and iron tools, written scripts, and mechanical devices often fail to appreciate sophisticated achievements that employed different technological approaches. Ancient builders who achieved precision results using techniques based on acoustic levitation, geometric cutting methods, or other approaches not recognized in contemporary technology are easily dismissed as primitive rather than acknowledged as different. The institutional momentum that builds around established interpretations creates self-reinforcing systems that become increasingly resistant to revision as more careers and research programs become invested in particular theoretical frameworks, challenging the conventional interpretation of Machu Picchu as 15th century. Inca achievement requires confronting not just archaeological evidence, but entire academic industries built around established chronologies and cultural assumptions. Yet despite these formidable barriers to revolutionary interpretation, evidence continues to accumulate that points toward possibilities far more intriguing than conventional archaeology acknowledges. The precision stonework, the astronomical sophistication, the mathematical knowledge, and the engineering achievements preserved at Machu Picchu speak eloquently to anyone willing to listen without the filters imposed by institutional orthodoxy. The veil of mystery that surrounds the site exists not because evidence is absent, but because the evidence points toward conclusions that challenge the comfortable assumptions around which entire academic and cultural institutions have been constructed. Lifting this veil requires not just new discoveries, but new willingness to follow evidence wherever it leads, even if the destination challenges everything we thought we knew about human capability, ancient achievement, and the depth of civilizational development in the pre-Columbian Americas. In the pre-dawn darkness that settles over the sacred valley like a blanket woven from starlight and shadow when the tourist buses have not yet begun their winding ascent, and the ruins stand in solitary communion with the eternal peaks, something extraordinary occurs for those who possess the patience to listen. The mountains speak, not in words that register on recording devices or in sounds that can be measured by scientific instruments, but in the deeper language of consciousness itself, transmitting information through channels that Western science has not yet learned to recognize or validate. The indigenous shamans who maintain the ancient traditions of the Andes understand this phenomenon as natural as sunrise, as fundamental to mountain ecology as the flow of glacial meltwater or the migration patterns of Incas across high-altitude grasslands. They speak of the Apu, the mountain spirits, as conscious entities capable of direct communication with human awareness through dreams, visions, and altered states of consciousness that arise naturally in the thin air and powerful electromagnetic environments of high-altitude locations. Machu Picchu, according to these traditional knowledge keepers, functions as one of the most powerful communication centers in the entire Andean chain. The citadel's location at the convergence of multiple sacred peaks, its precise astronomical alignments, and its sophisticated architectural integration of earthly and celestial geometries create conditions that amplify and focus the mountain's communicative capabilities. The site serves as a kind of natural radio telescope, designed to receive and transmit information through consciousness-based channels that operate according to principles Western science has not yet recognized. Modern visitors who approach Machu Picchu with appropriate respect and openness often report profound experiences that transcend ordinary tourist encounters. Dreams of unusual vividness and clarity, visions that provide insights into personal and collective challenges, intuitive understanding of complex problems that had previously seemed unsolvable. The experiences follow patterns consistent enough that they cannot be easily dismissed as coincidence or wishful thinking. Yet they remain sufficiently outside mainstream scientific frameworks that they are rarely documented or seriously studied. The acoustic properties of Machu Picchu's architecture may provide clues to the physical mechanisms underlying these consciousness-based communications. The stone structures create complex resonance patterns that amplify and focus sound waves in ways that could influence brainwave frequencies and neurological functioning. The water channels generate specific musical tones that create harmonic environments known to induce altered states of consciousness. The overall architectural design might function as a kind of consciousness-modifying technology, using sound, electromagnetic effects, and geometric relationships to enhance human receptivity to subtle information sources. The astronomical alignments built into the site's architecture take on additional significance when viewed through this consciousness communication lens. The precise tracking of celestial cycles might serve not just practical calendar functions, but also timing mechanisms for consciousness-based communications that operate according to astronomical cycles. Traditional shamanic practice throughout the Andes emphasizes the importance of astronomical timing for accessing different types of spiritual information and communicative experiences. The geographical positioning of Machu Picchu appears specifically chosen to optimize these consciousness-based communication functions. The site's location at the intersection of multiple powerful mountain apu, its elevation in the zone where atmospheric pressure begins to affect human neurological functioning, its exposure to cosmic radiation levels higher than those found at sea level, all create environmental conditions that could enhance human receptivity to subtle information sources operating through consciousness rather than conventional sensory channels. The traditional plant medicines used in Andean shamanic practice provide additional context for understanding consciousness-based mountain communications. Many of these plant allies are known to enhance human sensitivity to electromagnetic fields, subtle energy patterns, and information sources that operate below the threshold of normal conscious awareness. The combination of plant medicine practices with the specialized environmental conditions found at high-altitude sites, like Machu Picchu, could create optimal circumstances for receiving and interpreting mountain-based communications. The apparent abandonment of Machu Picchu might reflect disruption of these consciousness-based communication systems by foreign spiritual influences that European conquest brought to the Andes. Traditional indigenous cosmology emphasizes the importance of maintaining spiritual purity and cultural coherence for accessing subtle information sources. The introduction of European religious systems, technological approaches, and cultural assumptions could have created electromagnetic and consciousness-based interference that made it impossible to maintain the subtle communicative functions that gave the site its primary spiritual significance. Rather than allowing these sacred communication channels to be corrupted or destroyed, the traditional guardians might have chosen strategic withdrawal, transferring the most important knowledge to other locations while allowing Machu Picchu to return to the protective embrace of the jungle until conditions became favorable for restoring its proper spiritual functions. The physical architecture would remain as testament to the achievement, but the living communication systems would withdraw to preserve their integrity until future generations develop sufficient understanding and respect to reactivate them properly. The modern rediscovery of Machu Picchu and its subsequent development as a major tourist destination creates both opportunities and challenges for these consciousness-based functions. The increased human attention focused on the site might enhance its communicative capabilities, but the commercial tourism and scientific materialist approaches that dominate contemporary interpretation could also create interference patterns that disrupt subtle information transmission. Indigenous elders who maintain traditional relationships with the mountain Apu often express concern about the spiritual pollution created by inappropriate tourist behavior. Scientific research that treats the site as inert archaeological material rather than living sacred space, and commercial development that prioritizes economic rather than spiritual considerations. They emphasize the importance of approaching Machu Picchu with appropriate respect, offering proper ceremonial acknowledgement to the mountain spirits, and maintaining awareness of the site's continuing function as a place of consciousness-based communication and spiritual transformation. For those willing to approach Machu Picchu as a place where mountains continue to speak to human consciousness through channels that transcend ordinary sensory experience, the site remains as powerful and transformative as it was for the ancient peoples who recognized its spiritual significance. The voice of the mountains continues to carry information, insight, and wisdom for anyone who possesses the cultural sensitivity and personal openness necessary to receive communications that operate through the deep ecological intelligence that connects all conscious beings with the living landscape they inhabit. Beneath the official chronology that places human civilization in the Andes within neat developmental sequences, shadows move through archaeological layers like memories of dreams half remembered upon waking. What if the sophisticated achievements preserved at sites like Machu Picchu represent not the pinnacle of Andean cultural development, but rather the final flowering of civilizational traditions that stretched back through millennia of rise and decline, sophistication and collapsed knowledge accumulated, and wisdom lost to the relentless cycles that govern all human achievement? The conventional narrative describes Andean cultural development as a steady progression from hunter-gatherer societies to early agricultural settlements to the complex civilizations culminating in Inca imperial achievement. But this linear model struggles to account for the sudden appearance of sophisticated technologies, astronomical knowledge, and architectural capabilities that seem to emerge without clear developmental antecedents. The precision stonework at Machu Picchu, the mathematical sophistication of its astronomical alignments, the engineering achievements evident in its construction, all suggest access to knowledge systems that required much longer development periods than chronology allows. Recent archaeological discoveries throughout the Andes have begun to reveal evidence for much earlier sophisticated civilizations than previously recognized. The ceremonial center at Caral on the Peruvian coast has been dated to approximately 3500 BCE, making it contemporaneous with early dynastic Egypt and Mesopotamian city-states. The site displays architectural sophistication, astronomical alignments, and urban planning principles that challenge assumptions about the trajectory of civilization development in the Americas. The megalithic sites scattered throughout the Bolivian highlands present even more intriguing mysteries. Pumapunku, part of the Tiwanaku complex near Lake Titicaca, displays stonework precision that rivals or exceeds the finest masonry at Machu Picchu. The blocks are fitted with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters, achieving geometric relationships that require sophisticated mathematical knowledge and construction techniques that remain mysterious. Conventional dating places Pumapunku's construction around 600 CE, but the architectural sophistication suggests access to knowledge traditions that must have required much longer development periods. The astronomical sophistication evident at these ancient Andean sites points toward institutional continuity across much longer time spans than conventional models acknowledge. The knowledge required to create accurate astronomical alignments, predict celestial cycles, and integrate architectural design with cosmic relationships cannot be developed overnight. Such achievements require generations of systematic observation, mathematical analysis, and engineering refinement that suggests civilizational traditions extending much deeper into the past than archaeological orthodoxy typically recognizes. The oral traditions preserved by indigenous Andean peoples consistently speak of multiple cycles of civilization, with earlier cultures achieving levels of sophistication that their successors could barely comprehend. These stories describe ancient builders who possessed supernatural capabilities for working stone, who understood astronomical and mathematical principles that exceeded normal human knowledge, who created monuments designed to survive across geological timescales. While these accounts are typically dismissed as mythological, they might preserve actual memories of predecessor civilizations whose achievements were so far beyond their successors, capabilities that they could only be remembered as supernatural intervention. The geographical distribution of megalithic sites throughout the Andes suggests coordination and communication across vast distances that would have required sophisticated organizational capabilities and transportation technologies. Sites displaying similar construction techniques and astronomical alignments are scattered across territories spanning thousands of miles of mountainous terrain. Creating such coordination would have required institutional frameworks and communication systems far more sophisticated than anything attributed to pre-Columbian Andean civilizations by conventional archaeology. The genetic evidence from ancient Andean populations adds another layer of mystery to these questions about lost civilizations. DNA analysis of pre-Columbian remains has revealed population structures of surprising complexity, with genetic markers that suggest influences from populations not typically associated with indigenous American groups. Some ancient remains display genetic characteristics that appear to have Polynesian or even European affinities, pointing toward ancient American populations of much greater diversity than standard models predict. The possibility that ancient Andean civilizations included populations with genetic connections to advanced Old World cultures could explain the sudden appearance of sophisticated technologies and knowledge systems that seem to exceed indigenous American developmental trajectories. If ancient American populations included groups with access to knowledge traditions developed by advanced civilizations in other parts of the world, their achievements become more comprehensible within frameworks of ancient cultural exchange and technological diffusion. The climatic evidence from the Andes reveals periods of dramatic environmental change that could have triggered the rise and fall of civilizations across much longer time cycles than conventional history recognizes. Ice core data from Andean glaciers shows evidence for rapid climate shifts, extended droughts, and catastrophic weather events that would have severely challenged agricultural civilizations dependent on stable environmental conditions. Such environmental pressures could have forced the development of sophisticated adaptation technologies, while also triggering periodic civilizational collapses that eliminated complex knowledge systems. The archaeological evidence for these lost civilizations remains fragmentary and difficult to interpret because later cultures typically built upon earlier foundations, obscuring evidence for predecessor achievements. The stone blocks that comprise Machu Picchu's finest masonry might have been quarried and shaped by much earlier builders, then incorporated into Inca period construction that recognized their value without understanding their origins. The astronomical alignments might preserve knowledge accumulated across millennia of observation, maintained by successive cultures that inherited and preserved ancient wisdom without fully comprehending its theoretical foundations. The pattern emerging from these various lines of evidence suggests Andean civilizational development that operated according to much longer cycles than conventional all chronology acknowledges. Advanced cultures appear to have risen and fallen across timescales measured in millennia rather than centuries, each leaving behind fragments of knowledge and architectural achievement that their successors inherited, maintained, and sometimes expanded according to their own capabilities and purposes. Machu Picchu, in this interpretation, becomes not just an Inca achievement, but a repository of knowledge accumulated across multiple civilizational cycles. The site preserves evidence of ancient Andean peoples whose sophisticated understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering challenges everything we thought we knew about pre-Columbian capabilities. Their knowledge echoes in the precision of fitted stones, the accuracy of astronomical alignments, and the mathematical relationships that govern every aspect of the citadel's design. In the mist that rises from the jungle valleys below Machu Picchu, the shadows of these lost civilizations continue to move through archaeological mysteries that challenge the comfortable boundaries of accepted chronology. Stone remembers, in ways that transcend the crude metaphors of human language. The granite blocks that comprise Machu Picchu's most sacred structures preserve information across time scales that dwarf the brief flickering of human civilizations. Each crystal lattice holds data encrypted in molecular arrangements that record not just the geological processes of their formation, but also the techniques used to quarry, transport, and shape them into architectural elements of impossible precision. The stones themselves become libraries, preserving knowledge in formats more durable than any written language. The tool marks preserved on Machu Picchu's ancient blocks tell stories that conventional archaeology struggles to interpret. Where they remain visible after centuries of weathering, these microscopic traces reveal cutting techniques that achieve straight lines and precise angles across enormous stone surfaces using methods that remain completely mysterious. The marks suggest cutting edges that maintain their sharpness throughout extended operations on the hardest available stone types, implying either access to cutting technologies far more sophisticated than bronze and stone implements or construction techniques that operated according to principles entirely different from conventional mechanical approaches. Modern materials analysis, using electron microscopy and other advanced techniques, has revealed additional puzzling characteristics in the stone blocks. Some surfaces display molecular-level modifications that suggest exposure to extreme temperatures or chemical processes not associated with conventional stone working techniques. The crystal structures in certain areas show alignment patterns that could only result from very specific types of stress application, pointing toward construction methods that remain completely unexplained by current understanding of ancient technological capabilities. The acoustic properties embedded in Machu Picchu as stonework provide another avenue for accessing the knowledge preserved in the site's architectural memory. The blocks are arranged to create specific resonance patterns that amplify and focus sound waves in ways that serve both practical and spiritual functions. These acoustic effects cannot be accidental, but represent systematic application of principles that integrate architectural design with sophisticated understanding of wave mechanics and harmonic relationships. The mathematical relationships preserved in the stones, proportional arrangements encrypt knowledge systems that extend far beyond simple architectural planning. The golden ratio appears repeatedly in the dimensional relationships between different elements of the construction. The angles between building orientations correspond to astronomical constants and geometric principles that require advanced mathematical understanding to calculate and apply. The overall design preserves a kind of three-dimensional mathematical textbook, encoding complex knowledge and architectural relationships that remain accessible to anyone who possesses the theoretical frameworks necessary to decode them. The electromagnetic properties of Machu Picchu's stone arrangements suggest another layer of encoded information. The site's builders appear to have understood principles of electromagnetic field generation and manipulation, using specific stone types and arrangements to create measurable magnetic anomalies that could serve navigation, communication, or consciousness modification functions. Modern scientific instruments detect electromagnetic patterns throughout the site that align with architectural features and astronomical orientations in ways that suggest systematic rather than accidental electromagnetic design. The longevity of stone as an information storage medium far exceeds any other preservation technology developed by human civilizations. Paper disintegrates within centuries, metal corrodes within millennia, but properly arranged stone structures can preserve information across geological timescales measured in hundreds of thousands or even millions of years. If ancient builders understood this durability advantage, they might have chosen stone architecture specifically as a means of preserving crucial knowledge across much longer time periods than their own civilizations might survive. The redundancy built into Machu Picchu's information storage systems suggests builders who understood the importance of protecting crucial knowledge against various types of loss or destruction. The same mathematical relationships appear in multiple architectural elements throughout the site, ensuring that loss of any single component would not eliminate access to the encoded information. The astronomical alignments are repeated in different structures using different techniques, providing multiple methods for accessing the same celestial knowledge. The overall design displays the kind of systematic redundancy that characterizes sophisticated information storage systems designed for long-term preservation. The symbolic languages encoded in these stone arrangements represent another dimension of preserved knowledge. The architectural forms mirror natural patterns, mountain profiles, constellation arrangements, water flow geometries, creating stone representations of natural principles that remain accessible across cultural and linguistic boundaries. These symbolic systems could preserve knowledge in formats that transcend the limitations of specific human languages or cultural frameworks, ensuring accessibility to future civilizations regardless of their particular linguistic or conceptual development. The integration of practical and theoretical knowledge in Machu Picchu's stone memory systems reflects sophisticated understanding of information theory and knowledge preservation principles. The builders created architecture that simultaneously serves immediate practical functions: water distribution, astronomical observation, ceremonial space, while encoding theoretical knowledge that extends far beyond these practical applications. This integration ensures that the preserved knowledge remains connected to real-world applications rather than becoming abstract theoretical information divorced from practical utility. The geological context of Machu Picchu's information storage systems adds another layer of preservation strategy. The site's location in a seismically active region means that the stone arrangements must be designed to maintain their information encoding relationships despite periodic earthquake disruption. The builders appear to have understood principles of earthquake-resistant design that protect not just structural integrity, but also informational integrity, ensuring that the knowledge encoded in proportional relationships and architectural alignments would survive geological disturbances that might destroy more conventional information storage systems. The weathering patterns visible on different stone blocks throughout the site provide clues to the temporal depths of the knowledge preservation project. Some blocks show surface modifications consistent with exposure to the elements for periods measured in millennia rather than centuries, suggesting that the information storage project began much earlier than conventional chronology allows. Other blocks display characteristics indicating more recent placement, pointing toward ongoing knowledge preservation activities that extended across multiple civilizational periods. The continuing accessibility of the knowledge preserved in Machu Picchu's stone memory depends on the development of appropriate interpretive frameworks by future civilizations capable of recognizing and decoding the information storage systems. The builders appear to have understood that preserving knowledge across extended time periods requires not just durable storage media, but also encoding techniques that remain decipherable despite changes in cultural context and technological understanding. In the eternal dialogue between human intelligence and geological time, the stones of Machu Picchu continue to whisper their accumulated knowledge to anyone who possesses the patience and wisdom necessary to learn their ancient language. Imagine the morning when the mist parts over Machu Picchu to reveal not just the familiar ruins weathered by 5 centuries of wind and rain, but the moving shadows of their original architects. Picture figures emerging from the cloud forest, tall and purposeful, carrying tools we do not recognize and displaying knowledge that makes our modern engineering seem like a child's first attempts at construction. What would we see if the builders returned? How would their presence transform our understanding, not just of this mountain citadel, but of human capability itself? They would walk among the stones with the easy familiarity of artisans returning to examine work completed long ago, running experienced hands along joints that our finest engineers still struggle to comprehend. Their touch would reveal the secrets embedded in proportional relationships and mathematical constants, decode the information storage systems that preserve knowledge in formats more durable than any digital medium we have developed. They would read the astronomical alignments like textbooks, accessing computational systems that use architectural relationships to calculate celestial mechanics with precision that rivals our most sophisticated computer models. The tools they carry would challenge every assumption about pre-industrial technological limitations, perhaps cutting implements that maintain molecular-level sharpness through principles of sonic resonance or electromagnetic field manipulation, lifting devices that overcome gravitational resistance through applications of acoustic levitation or anti-gravity principles that our physics has not yet discovered, transportation systems that move multi-ton stone blocks across impossible terrain without leaving archaeological traces because they operate according to energy principles rather than mechanical force applications. Their construction techniques would reveal knowledge systems that integrate practical engineering with consciousness-based technologies we have barely begun to recognize. They might demonstrate how human awareness, properly focused and coordinated, can influence material properties at the molecular level, making hard stone temporarily malleable for precise shaping and fitting. Their acoustic technologies could show how sound waves, correctly applied, can reduce effective mass and gravitational resistance, allowing enormous blocks to be lifted and positioned using force applications that seem impossible by conventional mechanical standards. The astronomical knowledge they display would transform our understanding of ancient scientific capability. Their observations might extend far beyond our current knowledge of celestial mechanics, tracking cosmic cycles and galactic relationships that require observational continuity across thousands of years to detect and measure. Their mathematical frameworks could reveal numerical relationships and geometric principles that connect architectural design with quantum mechanics, consciousness research, and cosmological theories at the frontiers of modern scientific understanding. Their presence would expose the profound limitations in our interpretation of archaeological evidence. The pottery shards and settlement patterns that dominate conventional archaeology would appear as surface artifacts, insignificant traces of daily life that reveal nothing about the sophisticated knowledge systems that guided ancient architectural achievement. The radiocarbon dates that support our chronologies would be revealed as measuring organic materials used during final construction phases or later renovation activities, providing no information about when the most sophisticated stonework was originally completed. The cultural sophistication they represent would challenge every comfortable assumption about primitive ancient societies and linear technological progress. Their integration of practical engineering with spiritual understanding, their synthesis of mathematical precision with artistic achievement, their planning that encompasses geological timescales rather than human lifespans would reveal civilizational capabilities that exceed our own in crucial areas, despite their lack of electronic technologies and industrial machinery. Their approach to knowledge preservation would demonstrate information storage and transmission systems far more sophisticated than anything we have developed. They would show how architectural relationships can encode complex knowledge in formats accessible across linguistic and cultural boundaries, how astronomical alignments can function as computational devices for calculating relationships that extend far beyond simple calendar functions, how consciousness-based information systems can preserve and transmit knowledge through channels that operate independently of material technologies. Their understanding of Earth's geological and climatic systems, would reveal planning capabilities that account for environmental changes across much longer timescales than our civilization considers. They would demonstrate construction techniques designed to survive not just normal weathering and seismic activity, but catastrophic events that periodically reshape entire continents. Their site selection criteria would show how to identify locations that remain stable and accessible across multiple cycles of climate change and geological transformation. The social organization required for their achievements would challenge our assumptions about ancient political and economic systems. Their coordination of complex construction projects across vast territories, their integration of astronomical observation with architectural planning, their preservation of sophisticated knowledge across multiple generations would require institutional frameworks far more sophisticated than the primitive kingdoms and tribal organizations typically attributed to pre-Columbian civilizations. Their return would force recognition that human achievement extends much deeper into the past than our chronologies allow, that civilizational capability follows cyclical rather than linear patterns, that knowledge and wisdom can be accumulated and then lost across timescales that dwarf our historical awareness. The comfortable narrative of steady progress from primitive to sophisticated would collapse in the face of evidence for ancient achievements that exceed our current capabilities in crucial areas. But perhaps most profoundly, their presence would reveal that consciousness itself represents a technology far more powerful than any mechanical device we have developed. They would demonstrate how human awareness, properly trained and coordinated, can access information sources and manipulate material reality in ways that make our electronic technologies seem crude and limited. They would show that the real achievements of advanced civilizations lie not in their mechanical devices, but in their understanding of consciousness as the fundamental creative force that shapes material reality according to focused intention and expanded awareness. Standing among the ruins of Machu Picchu, in the presence of its returning architects, we would finally understand that we are not the inheritors of primitive ancestors, but rather the diminished descendants of civilizations, whose achievements we have not yet learned to appreciate or comprehend. The mist rolls back across the ancient stones one final time, revealing Machu Picchu in the golden light of dawn. Each shadow cast by the massive blocks tells a story. Each perfectly fitted joint whispers of hands that worked with precision beyond our understanding. The city sits in eternal silence, keeping its secrets as it has for centuries. We stand at the edge of a mystery that refuses to be solved. The official narrative speaks of Pachacuty's vision of Inca engineers and workers transforming a mountain peak into an architectural marvel in mere decades. Yet the evidence scattered across these terraces tells a different story, a deeper story, one that reaches back through time to touch civilizations we've forgotten, technologies we've lost, and knowledge we're only beginning to rediscover. Consider what we've uncovered in our journey through the shadows of history. The megalithic foundations that dwarf anything the Inca built elsewhere. The astronomical alignments that suggest knowledge of celestial mechanics far beyond what any 15th century civilization should have possessed. The construction techniques that modern engineers struggle to replicate even with our advanced machinery. The geological evidence of a site far older than Inca occupation. The myths and legends that speak of gods who came from the stars, bringing knowledge and disappearing into legend. Picture the master builders of this unknown civilization. In the depths of prehistory, perhaps 10,000 years ago or more, they climbed this mountain peak. They understood the movement of stars with mathematical precision. They could cut and transport stones weighing dozens of tons with an ease that seems impossible. They built not just for decades, but for millennia, knowing their work would outlast empires yet to be born. The morning light catches the Intihuatana stone, that mysterious carved rock that captures the sun's energy and channels it into the earth below. Modern science struggles to explain its purpose, its perfect angles, its connection to astronomical events. Yet there it stands, a testament to knowledge that transcends our current understanding of ancient capabilities. What if everything we believe about the timeline of human civilization is incomplete? What if scattered across our planet are remnants of achievements that predate our oldest records? Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids, forces us to reconsider how advanced prehistoric societies could be. Easter Island's Moai statues stare across the Pacific with blank eyes, their creators vanished into mystery. The Antikythera mechanism, a device of such sophisticated engineering that nothing comparable would be built for another 1,000 years, reminds us that ancient knowledge could surpass our expectations. Machu Picchu fits into this pattern of anomalous achievements, a site that doesn't quite belong to the civilization that claimed it. Evidence of techniques and knowledge that seem imported from another time, another culture entirely. The Inca were remarkable builders, sophisticated astronomers, skilled engineers. But perhaps they were also inheritors of something far greater. The terraces cascade down the mountainside in perfect harmony with the natural contours of the land. Each level tells of agricultural knowledge that transformed a harsh mountain environment into productive farmland. Yet beneath these Inca improvements lie the bones of something older. Foundation stones too massive for Inca techniques. Astronomical markers too precise for Inca knowledge. Water channels carved from living rock with a sophistication that speaks of master hydraulic engineers. In the silence of dawn, before the tourists arrive, before the modern world intrudes, Machu Picchu reveals its true nature. Not just an Inca retreat, not simply a royal estate or fortress city. Something far more profound. A legacy site where ancient knowledge was preserved, where astronomical observations were recorded, where the wisdom of a lost civilization was encoded in stone and star alignment. The condors circle overhead, riding the thermals that rise from the valley below. They've watched these ruins for centuries, perhaps millennia. They've seen empires rise and fall, seen explorers stumble through the jungle in search of golden cities, seen archaeologists carefully brush soil from carved stones. The condors know the mountain's secrets, but they speak only in the language of wind and wing. We may never know the full truth of Machu Picchu's origins. The evidence points toward a complexity of construction and occupation that defies simple explanations. Multiple civilizations, multiple building phases, multiple purposes layered one upon another like geological strata. The Inca were the final chapter in a much longer story, inheritors of a site that had already stood for thousands of years when they arrived. This uncertainty doesn't diminish the mystery. Instead, it deepens it. In our age of satellites and ground-penetrating radar, of carbon dating and computer analysis, we still cannot fully explain how Machu Picchu was built, when its foundations were first laid, or what knowledge its builders possessed. The mountain keeps its secrets, sharing them only in fragments and hints, in anomalies that don't fit our timeline of human development. Perhaps that's as it should be. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, to keep us humble before the achievements of our ancestors. In our rush to catalog and categorize, to assign dates and cultures to every stone, we sometimes lose sight of the wonder that should overwhelm us when we stand before such monuments to human ingenuity. The mist begins to rise again, slowly obscuring the terraces and temples. Soon Machu Picchu will disappear once more into the clouds, becoming ethereal, otherworldly, a city suspended between earth and sky as it was always meant to be. In that liminal space between the known and unknown, between history and mystery, the ancient stones continue their patient wait. They wait for new technologies that might reveal their secrets. They wait for new discoveries that might rewrite the timeline of human civilization. They wait for the moment when humanity is ready to accept that our past might be far stranger, far more sophisticated, far more mysterious than we ever dared imagine. Until then, Machu Picchu endures. A question mark carved in stone at the edge of the world. A reminder that for all our knowledge, for all our technology, for all our confidence in our understanding of history, there are still mysteries that transcend our explanations. There are still places where ancient wisdom touches the modern world, where the impossible becomes tangible, where the past reaches forward to challenge everything we think we know. The eternal question remains suspended in the mountain air, like the mist itself. Who really built this place? What knowledge did they possess? What other wonders lie hidden in the forgotten chapters of human history? The stones know. The stars remember. And somewhere in the intersection of astronomy and archaeology, of legend and fact, of mystery and evidence, the truth waits to be discovered. If you found yourself captivated by these ancient mysteries, if you felt the pull of questions that have no easy answers, consider joining others who seek to explore the hidden wonders of our world. The journey into mystery has only just begun.